2024. And we are here for our monthly work session of the Athens-Clarke County Mayor Commission. We have 6 items on the agenda, 3 for which we're just providing opportunity for any questions you may have, and 3 where we'll have a presentation as well as some discussion. But before we get to those 6 items, given that we are going to be voting on September 17th, a week from today, on the workforce program, we do have some staff from HCD and the Economic Development Office to answer any questions that were lingering about that item. I know Commissioner Myers, you wanted to make clear that there were several steps that individual end recipients of programming dollars may have to take simply to be compliant with public dollar expenditures. Did you want to articulate that a little bit further?
Yes, I have communicated somewhat already with the Conchundry and her team over there. I think that one of the things I want to make clear to my colleagues here, because it wasn't clear to me until yesterday, was that last week when we sat down at our desk to vote, there was a copy of an agenda report that we just received. I did not at that point go and click on the link for the posted, agenda item, where I would have seen, and it was just posted, I would have seen that there was a summary page of recommendations from the Economic Development Office, as well as all of the applications, which go into 160 pages. So for those of us who are wanting more detail, the detail is there to review. But in terms of the recommendations themselves, I was looking at them yesterday, and I believe in the agenda report, it said something approved with under conditions that these entities would work with the economic development group to get things finalized. And so these recommendations lay out what's needed. I would like it that there is actually a time deadline for this. We're at the end of this process here. These are entities that are getting an award without the standard process, as we all explained, because it's tight and everything else. An easy one is the outcome. I mean, not easy, but the outcomes, like more specific outcomes. Well, if an organization cannot get that outcomes to us, I'm not sure we really want to give them the allotted amount of money if they can't get that back in an appropriate amount of time. So I'd just like there to be deadlines on this, because I know that in October, we're going to be voting on that, like what to do with the money that isn't spent, the ARPA money. And so we want to know what we have here. So that's one thing I'd like to just make sure that we have in here. And if that's in there, I'll feel a lot more confident voting this. I don't want this to go off into, as a teacher of writing assignments, like, oh yeah, you get one more try. No, everything is due by next Wednesday. That's it. Here it is. So I just want a deadline on this.
So right now we're working with the agencies through the contingencies, and we have a final date, the 13th for everything.
The 13th of
Friday, the 13th September.
September. Okay, good. So then you'll have an update on this for us.
Before the
Great. Wonderful.
All right. Any other questions about that, Dexter?
Also, I think we need to understand that the chamber budget has gone through. Understand that they can go ahead and start their process. Mr. Meyer with the that's gonna be working in the chamber. So yeah.
Right. And that was in the CDO. There was some confusion about that, but in the CDO, it said that the money was allotted to the chamber for the Athens Achieve, and it did including these 3 other programs that were in there. So that's already been approved there. So we're approving the other items that were part of the committee that Commissioner Taylor and I looked at.
Right. Avita?
I know September the 13th sounds like good date, deadline. But Mayor, can we talk before the the retreat, because I think some of this might still need some, for me, they need some clarity. Is there a piece we can carve out?
What I plan on doing is carving out an hour at the retreat so we can talk about the remaining ARPA funds.
And that was my point. I still am not, I'm not comfortable about how this whole process has rung out. And I want to be comfortable by the time we sign off on it. And it's nobody's fault. I'm not criticizing nobody. I'm just saying I need to feel a little bit better about how this whole workforce money rolled out.
So we'll talk about that next week,
Okay.
Friday.
And to clarify, because I think it's been a little confusing for all of us, the only thing we're voting on with the ARPA money is this money that's going to the, I think, is it 6 entities or 5? 6 entities, with the Economic Justice Coalition, the
Georgia CEO.
Georgia CEO, et cetera, et cetera. That's all we're voting on next week. So all the two other, what to do with the remaining ARPA funds and the process for dealing with any recalled ARPA funds, we're going to be voting on that in October. Okay.
Anything else? All right, Chandra, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you all. All right, we had 3 items again, just for any questions that may have emerged. First of those was the hazard mitigation plan, and Fire Chief Nate Moss is here with us today to answer any questions about that. Dexter.
I got several, and thank you, Chief. We went together, then I noticed Jones that sent us the mitigation plan. Several questions and several concerns. And I have not read our mitigation plan. We had just got to. I'll go.
I know it's a big digestible thing. It's 240 plus pages. Yes.
So my first one is, and I think I had publicly stated this in the past. I do want to consider, I think we need to have a separate emergency operations department. Away from the fire department. A city this size, I believe, needs to have their own emergency management operation. And that may something we want to talk to in the budget process, or if we got somebody in place already that's doing that, we that person over to the department. I think it's critical. That if we have any type of natural disaster, any type of terrorist attack or anything, that we'll prepare as a city. Now, I don't know whether or not we are, because I hadn't read the whole mitigation plan. I think it, I know I went to UGA. We have a side plan in place. We knew what to do with our partners. Now, one thing I did not see in the proposal, at least in the PowerPoint, public safety, police department. I know we had different departments. I did not see ACCPD in this, but it may be there. I'm not saying that.
You're right. They were, yes, sir.
Okay.
That wasn't a comprehensive list of those that participated. We did have almost 50 participants that took place. Yes, sir.
And the other one, I didn't realize that, which is a good thing, that we have had these ongoing discussions with the community agencies. I think it would be appropriate. Again, I'm not sure how much we broadcast or advertise that, but it may be appropriate that the community know that we're doing these things and have been doing these things.
Absolutely.
And then the other one is, I'm assuming we're gonna be doing some updates. What you got now, we'll be updating our mitigation plan.
These are the updates. The 240 page document, I believe you may have received either last night or this morning. Those are the updates to the existing plan. So it's basically the updates, including what strategies are still in place. It's a living document, so it's going to continue to cycle.
And the other thing, have we ever did any type of drill on locally? Have we did drills before?
We do several a year. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Our most recent drill was in April, I believe. We had a full scale exercise at the airport simulating a plane crash.
I know.
We had all emergency responders and even community partners partner up with us to do that. Yes, sir.
Okay.
That was just one example.
And once I get into the detail, I think
Sure.
this is a big interest of mine.
Of course, and I know it is to you. And if I could speak to some of those questions and points, if you don't mind. So I'm in agreement with you. With the county and city of this size and scope that we have as far as the number of people that live here, work here, and visit here, as well as go to school here. It is a very comprehensive process to manage emergency management concerns. We do have appropriate emergency action plans. This is a separate document now. So the hazard mitigation plan, just to kind of give you an update of what it is. The hazard mitigation plan is kind of planning ahead for any potential hazard or disaster that may affect our community. We know based on the history of the community, as well as what's trending in current concerns in our region or in nationwide, those sort of things eventually could happen. The purpose of this plan is to lessen the impact that's felt, whether it be on a loss of life, property, economic level, or any other environmental level, anything that would be of concern to our local community. We want to lessen the impact. So for every dollar that's spent towards these mitigation strategies that you see outlined in some of the plan that you'll be able to review later, it saves about $6 in recovery and disaster response expenses. So planning ahead allows us to be able to tap into resources that will help us to make best use of the limited funds we have. And we're required by the federal government to update a plan, have a plan, to be able to apply for certain grants and assistance programs financially. So by having these things addressed, such as thunderstorms or terrorism, these things that are covered in our plan, we're able to seek grant funding to apply towards the mitigation of problems before they happen. So this is kind of in advance of any disaster. That's why I want you to kind of keep it separate from like an emergency action plan that happens during a disaster or any other plans in which we're having to do the response part. This is prior to the response. So this is kind of something that we've been doing, at least to my records. I know we've been doing it since 2006. Back then we had 11 people on a committee, internal ACC Gov employees. Now we have 48, and you see the list of folks that we've included in our plan. I'm actually assisting with Oconee County's plan right now. They're going through the same process. So I'm actually visiting their county to help weigh in on stuff because we're mutual aid partners. So we do take seriously the regional effects of these types of things as well. I'm not in any disagreement with you of the fact that it would be nice and ideal for us to have an emergency management department. Manager Jones knows that that's my intent. If we can continue to work in that direction, I would like for this to be something that's a self-sustaining department that has all the support financially and with resources as far as personnel that we will need. That's something that I would like to continue to build while it's still under the fire department umbrella. I'll be supportive of that business model. I would like to get us back to that point and even exceed what we've done in times past because our needs have changed. Our needs have grown and evolved beyond just a couple of people doing this. We need to be able to throw more resources at it, personnel wise, planning wise, and of course, having the financial backing to be able to support that. I'm in complete agreement. To provide an update as well, we actually are in the process of hiring an emergency management coordinator. I know you approved that position for us. Hopefully having the conditional offer made by the end of this week is kind of our goal. But we've done interviews, we've selected a candidate. We're just hoping to be able to finish things on our end on a human resources level and be able to extend that offer by week's end. So we're tracking towards the steps that lead up to that independence one day.
And my last thing is, I'm going to share with my colleagues. I know we have to be careful about what we share with the public. That we be mindful that we can't share everything that we do, but you don't want nobody to get you. So I'm not sure how much, I know some public, some people in the community have asked for that. I'm not sure how much we can share, but I can say this publicly for whoever's listening. We do have to be selective about what we put out there. So I think we should be mindful of that in the public understand we can put out everything that we do, when it comes to emergency management.
That is true. We want to be able to educate the public on the dangers and what they can do to minimize dangers to their own personal health, well-being, financial impacts, business impacts. We want to help them. But again, like you said, we can't have every play in the playbook completely outlined for them. But we're not trying to hold anything back, obviously. It's just one of those things that we've continued to collaborate with our partners within the community. We've got the Emergency Preparedness Office with UGA. We've got the Emergency Preparedness Offices with the hospitals. We've got the emergency preparedness people with school districts. We're working together with them as well as our partners in law enforcement and other public safety, within the county to continue to work on these plans. That's why we do tabletop exercises. We do full-scale drills. We do small, we do large. We do a little bit of everything every year. We have to do that, to certain federal requirements as well as local and state requirements, but we do that electively. Something that's in the works that you saw probably outlined in my presentation is our Category 1 dams. We have emergency action plans in place for the 3 dams that are Category 1 dams in this county. I have plans to work with my friends right here to be able to do some tabletop exercises to make sure our plans are still viable, make sure they're still current, and if there needs to be any adaptations made, that's why we do these on a regular basis. So that's something that we have in the works, and I appreciate that.
Patrick, and then I saw Peter.
I'll wait until you finish your presentation. You may answer it, but my only question.
Just the questions only.
Oh, question, I'm sorry.
Right ahead.
Yeah, funds of, so you're looking for, a PC and iPhone or iPad or something. Is that do you have the funds for that now in the current budget?
Those actually have already been purchased. That's something we've actually completed that mitigation strategy. Those were for our emergency operations center, and those have been acquired. So that was basically showing 5 things that we've already completed since our last iteration of the hazard mitigation plan 5 years ago.
Okay.
We're checking some boxes, but we're also being able to prioritize for new projects.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Peter?
I know that, plan looked good, but I glanced through. My question is, how does it impact, or how, we went through this whole union thing with the firefighter. How is that wrapped in? How's that role working since our firefighter?
This is more of an independent overall, impact on the community as a whole. We're still going to have the firefighters responding and doing things from the fire department perspective, no different than before.
But I remember you said you listed the different departments.
Correct.
So I just.
All of the work that was done prior to the collective bargaining agreement even being voted on by mayor and commission.
Oh.
All of our work, we had a delay. So I guess let me explain to the group maybe why we've had some delays in this process. Mostly coming from the federal level, there have been some changes to the guidelines as well as the review process for hazard mitigation plans nationwide. So this has left a ripple effect for all of the counties in Georgia. We basically had a logjam of hazard mitigation plans that went nowhere for several months. And then as they were going through the review process, we had to make certain changes, very minimal changes to some of the information we provided. We've provided all of those changes, and we finally cleared that logjam, and we finally got everything approved by GEMA and then FEMA. So now we're basically just waiting on it to be approved by you all. And also FYI, City of Winterville is voting this evening. They're indicating that they're going to be voting to approve it, but they also have to agree on their portion of the plan because part of it does cover the City of Winterville as well. Bogart's actually covered under the Athens-Clarke County just in general for us.
Listen.
The page with the updates from the previous plan, technological man-made emergencies, terrorism, does that include mass shootings?
It can, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And that was one of the concerns that was including mass shootings or anything that could affect the community in a very impactful way. So we're talking about something that will either be a likely event to occur, like thunderstorms. Severe thunderstorms happen all the time, or something that if it did occur would be most impactful. Obviously, that would be a very impactful thing, so it is covered. Yes, ma'am.
I have another question. You talked about how the community has changed pretty drastically last decade or so. The plan, I presume it takes into account the prevalence of tall and large scale buildings. That is kind of.
It does take into account basically buildings in general and the economic impact that anything would happen. More expensive buildings are going to have a more impactful financial, devastation to our community if certain things were to come through. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I also know that we've had to invest in updated equipment.
Correct. Right. And that's part of the mitigation strategies. We actually came up with about a little over new mitigation strategies, I think 42 new strategies. So we have some really good outside the box thinking going on and good collaboration with all of the partners that were involved in the discussion. So we're not just looking at things and saying, okay, let's check these boxes. We covered them last time. We're good. We basically wanted to come up with new impacts. How was this going to affect us now moving forward? Like you said, as we change year to year, how is this going to really help us mitigate this problem moving forward? Because not everything is going to stay the same. Nothing stays, stagnant for too long when it comes to disasters and the impacts that could be felt in a community. Plus, we had to come up with some new ones. A pandemic. Who would have thought about that 5 years ago? So, of course, we had to cover all of those things in our discussion as well.
Follow up, Avita?
Yeah, I think that Commissioner Lynn kind of captured a little bit when I was talking about the union. One of the benefits was that a lot of the equipment, or some of the equipment, could help offset costs or getting it in
Yes.
another, I'm not gonna say cheaper, but
Right.
another avenue
That's absolutely true.
for a resource. So
That's
I
correct.
guess that's
Yes, ma'am.
where I was
I
talking.
think I know where you're going with that question. So I know with the union, we're able to take advantage of some training options now. So we're going to be seeking out some hazardous materials technician training through the local union. We could hopefully have that done for free. It's going to be federally respected instructors coming to us, giving our folks the training they need to have more technicians available, as well as to make sure that the technicians we have are trained on the latest and greatest. So that we are utilizing the union for that. And I will say the partnership with the union will be amazing moving forward. We're kind of treading lightly right now because we're still feeling our way through things because it's a new process for us, both with the fire department and with the union. But there's a lot of great ideas that actually this plan will.
And I guess that's what I was trying to say,
Yes, ma'am.
really.
I apologize. Yeah, I get where you're going. Yes, ma'am.
Jesse?
Yeah, thanks for being here. I mean, this is a dense document, and like others have noted, I haven't had a chance to actually read through it. Control Fing. I knew I had questions about.
It will take some time.
Yeah, so one question I have, I'm looking at your, you note for extreme temperatures, there's kind of these competing definitions of FEMA and National Weather Service.
Right.
It wasn't clear to me reading through this, like which one we're using. In that, like I personally, the National Weather Service one seems to make more sense because it's about a heat index.
Right.
Not just.
We typically, locally, when we have any kind of weather concerns, if I send an email out to you all, be prepared for weather, I'm usually getting my information from the National Weather Service. We have many briefings that lead up to a weather event or, even in the days of the weather event. So that's typically what we lean on as far as operationally. But broad strokes purposes, we refer to all options.
Okay. So I guess where I'm wondering where this might be especially relevant is with this question of shelter
Right.
due to extreme temperature.
Sure.
And like which definition are we using that would trigger our response? Because
Well,
my understanding is to this.
Our response would be mostly outlined in our emergency shelter plan. That's, again, an independent document, an independent action plan from the hazard mitigation plan. However, the strategies that we're implementing from our hazard mitigation plan towards our emergency sheltering plan, we're able to check some boxes of accomplishment. So like one of the things that we had set aside as a mitigation strategy would be to buy generators for a couple of our leisure services locations in the event of a weather emergency, and we had to have an emergency shelter built and stood up, and we would have a backup generator. So this is our way to track that and potentially a way for us to get financial assistance in getting those generators. We're currently using ARPA funds towards those generators, but that is a project that this hazard mitigation plan was referring to as a new mitigation strategy. So it kind of works hand in hand with that emergency shelter plan.
Is there a draft of the emergency shelter plan?
There is a draft. It's only in draft form right now that we can maybe get to you. I thought one may have been sent out previously, but I don't know where we are as far as.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay,
I've never.
I'll see what I can.
Actually, I arrived here mostly with questions, I guess, about that.
About that.
I thought that was going to be part of this.
No, it actually is from a by and large thing. So again, the hazard mitigation plan is just a broad reaching. Let's try to catch it all. So if it's not captured in our hazard mitigation plan, we can't really request funding in advance of a disaster. So if I wanted to request funding for anything related to shelter planning, I had to make sure that there was various aspects such as hot or cold weather emergencies included in our plan. But it can be very broad strokes. So now that we've included it, I can seek funding for that, or we can utilize, that as a resource to help our emergency plan for shelter, if that makes sense.
That is helping me understand it. And so then I guess I'm looking at, and again, I might not be looking at the right things here because I'm
No, you're
control Fing. I haven't actually read through.
You're good.
I think it's like page, if anyone's got it pulled up, 184, the Word document. There's this chart, right? And it
Yeah.
talks about formalized agreement between community organizations and counties with regard to sheltering operations.
Right.
I'm guessing that's talking about.
And we have had a lot accomplished since that authorization, the authoring of that particular document. So basically, all that can be contained in our hazard mitigation plan document is what we agreed upon back in April and May of 2023.
Okay, so this is what I'm wondering about. There's like these little check boxes there.
Right.
And there isn't one under drought/extreme temperature,
Right.
and there isn't one under thunderstorm. And I'm wondering whether it makes sense for us to make sure that that is in there.
It is.
That we can then.
It is included.
Sheltering plan.
It is included as far as it's addressed. It may be checked or not checked based on the progress of certain strategic goals within that particular concern. So if we are looking at thunderstorms, I mean, that's something that we're pretty much equipped to deal with already. But are there any extra actions that we must take? That's something that we'll have to get together with the related community partners and decide, okay, are further steps needed towards thunderstorms? Or are we needing to put our eggs in a different basket? I know the concern has been lately with the shelter plan. That's where we want to put most of our eggs right now are concerning getting this shelter plan finalized before cold weather hits this year.
Yeah, which I think we were all hoping was going to happen last year.
Correct.
And so I guess without maybe obsessing over how it's reflected in here, what I'm trying to understand is this plan as it's drafted moving forward going to set us up to be providing adequate shelter for extreme cold and extreme heat? Because we know that that's going to keep happening.
Right.
Like it's almost inevitable. It's going to be happening.
This
every
plan
year.
covers the opportunity for us to seek federal funding to support those concerns. Yes, sir.
Even with these little check boxes not.
Correct. So basically, there is no requirement on any level, whether it be local, state, or federal, for us to complete these mitigation strategies. Nobody comes back and checks our work to make sure these mitigation strategies are either completed or semi-completed. That's up to us. And we ask to continue to do that as we continue to make sure our priorities are still in the right place. So for us, locally, that is of high concern. So I would envision that those boxes will be checked the next time we do an update to our plan. So since nobody goes back and checks our work, we work with our community partners to make sure that these strategies are happening, kind of self-policing ourselves. We're making sure that we're doing what we need to do in the correct amount of time in order to make sure that we've addressed it. Because it was a priority at one point. We're going to make sure it stays a priority or it gets solved ultimately.
I was gonna say, obviously, the sort of shelter component of this is a big area of concern and the temperature. And Chief, you said you have a draft.
We do,
The
yes.
shelter component, is that something that's ready for distribution?
It can be, I can distribute that to the group here. And just so you know, we were tracking things very closely last year. We had a dashboard that was built, when it came to the emergency shelters, whether there was all of the available usual resources were fully utilized. We never had one time in which both overnight shelters were 100% at capacity. We always had available capacity at some of the shelters. So we have a tiered approach to our emergency response before local government stands up an actual shelter. We never even achieved tier 2. That would be a tier 3 thing for us to stand up a shelter at a leisure services facility. You didn't even have to stand up any temporary shelters at a church or a gymnasium or anything like that, because the day-to-day facilities were not being utilized to their fullest.
Commissioner Holden, I've asked the same questions you've asked. And Chief Moss, could you explain it to Commissioner Holt about how the shelter plan will interact with this very specific document?
Absolutely.
Because you explained to me that there was a very specific way that the shelter plan will interact with this document.
Right. So basically the fact that this document covers those types of emergencies. So basically we're looking at emergency types. And again, broad strokes, how does cold weather affect us? It affects our community in a very unique way. So the fact that we've covered that type of emergency, now it's my turn to tell the story to anybody we're requesting funding for, to assist us with our shelter plan. So if we need some resources to enact our shelter plan, we would refer back to the fact that it was covered in our overall hazard mitigation strategy. So again, this is.
Can I ask one other?
Sure.
Then, the thunderstorms, as
Right.
So we've had these downbursts,
Right.
right? They're not tornadoes. Sometimes they seem like it when they move through the
Right.
topography of hills and stuff.
Right.
We've been really lucky so far that it hasn't resulted in people dying, but it has resulted in people's homes being
Right.
severely damaged, and in
Right.
some places like half a home completely destroyed. And because it's happening in these like micro areas,
Mhm.
it's not a FEMA emergency.
Correct.
So I guess my two-part question is, I didn't see, again, with my control Fing fly here, downbursts mentioned under the.
It actually is addressed in there.
It is?
It
Okay.
is, yes, sir. There's one page that I think that's actually got a visual of a downburst.
Okay, cool. So that is in here. And then the other question is, how is this plan setting us up to respond to things that aren't like a FEMA or a state emergency? Because I remember one of the problems we ran into, we had this downburst a couple years ago that wiped out a whole bunch of trees and portions of buildings in District 6. No
Right.
people died. There were a bunch of trees down though.
Right.
And like, that was only minorly different. I could see us very much needing a shelter. for
Right,
example.
right, exactly.
But it was a few neighborhoods, so it wasn't really seen as like a FEMA emergency.
Right.
And so are we going to set ourselves up to respond to that in a way that like
Right.
we can declare our own emergency and then have access to the funding that this thing's.
That's something that we're working on. We're also working with some other community partners for some other avenues of funding. If it's not a declared emergency, there may be some options for us from some of the business partners. That's something that's still in the works, but
And then absent
Kind of
funding, I
become-
guess, absent funding, are we still gonna have somewhere in this shelter plan, I guess, that we'll see a draft of a plan for standing up a shelter if needed in a situation that's not a FEMA?
well, that's something that can happen independent of the emergency shelter plan. Yes.
Okay,
I mean,
it doesn't require FEMA, because before, and again, I'm just going on what happened before, we
Right.
went through this before.
Right.
So it might be in a different situation.
Sure.
But before, it was like, well, we can't even do this until FEMA comes and brings their cots or whatever it was.
Right.
And so we were kind of in the situation where we were waiting on the involvement of a higher agency, and it kind of begged the question, well, if we're not even in a situation that higher agency is acknowledging,
Right.
do we have the resources?
How do we help our
to set
people?
up a
Right.
Shelter.
Right. So that's actually where part of this plan will actually come into that. So in our mitigation strategies, if we determine that, okay, we need to have a store of cots, and we want to have some portable generators, but we can more efficiently stand up shelters, portable showers, things like that. That's something that we can do because of the hazard mitigation plan, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in an emergency shelter plan that's designed for warm or cold weather. But if we're speaking to just broad strokes, sheltering for any disaster, we can include it in both plans.
Okay.
So that's where they would marry together. So for our emergency shelter plan right now, the first iteration is focusing on weather emergencies, like cold weather, hot weather, and planned cold weather. Like we know when cold weather is coming, it's going to get to a threshold in which we need to take action and try to get shelter assistance for our homeless population or vulnerable populations. We know kind of when that's coming because of our relationship with the National Weather Service. So we continue to plan ahead for those, but with, like you said, the downbursts and the thunderstorms, that's more of a response.
Okay.
So how do we respond? So that's in our emergency action plan. That's in what we would do, kind of. We got several
Emergency
plans.
action plan, is that separate from the emergency
It
shelter
is,
plan?
and I'm trying not to confuse the situation.
So is there also a copy of that we should be trying to see?
We've got older copies of that I'll have to see if I can find a digital copy of that, but that's something that's my emergency management coordinator will be helping to update.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where I'm landing, like I've been
Yeah.
eagerly awaiting this for like 3 years.
Sure.
About to roll off, as we all know, but
Right.
like, it would be helpful,
Mhm.
while I have a chance to talk about this with you all. to
Sure.
Understand how these plans are all interacting.
Right,
to
right.
Make sure that if the kind of thing that happens
Yeah.
from time to time now, and has already happened in my district even.
Right.
Happens again, we're better set up
Right.
in the future. Because
That's
last time I was pretty dismayed at
Sure.
how ill-prepared we were.
How ill-prepared we were, right.
And so I guess my last question on this, just, and then I'm done on this one for now, thank you, is, CCSD and UGA have giant facilities just like we do that could be stood up for emergency
Right.
shelters. Are they involved in this plan?
They are involved in this plan. They
And
are.
are they involved in the shelter plan as well?
They are to some degree involved in the shelter plan, yes.
So like a CCSD gym, for example?
Well, I don't know that we've had any discussions with CCSD as much as we had with UGA. So that's something I would have to bring them in on the discussion. And that was something that CCSD had involvement with the hazard mitigation plan, but I don't know that they had much involvement with the shelter plan. But we can bring them into the discussion.
So yeah, I guess parting thought is CCSD has a lot of buildings with a
Lot of
lot of space that could be used for emergency shelters. So
Right.
maybe it would be good to have them.
That's true. And what we found in our discussions with our partners, it's the easiest route for us to go is an Athens-Clarke County owned facility. Leisure services facilities are kind of the easiest for us to quickly turn to. In the event of emergency, we can quickly stand up a shelter at one of our own locations as opposed to having to, necessarily, interfere with school day if they're still able to go to school after an emergency or things like that. So we've been focusing more on our own leisure services parks and other facilities for that in our shelter plan. So those are outlined in our shelter plan, which facilities we would use and kind of the order in which we would go based on an emergency as it happens. So those are already in the shelter plan. So I know it'll help for you to be able to see that.
So Manager Jones will follow up via email with kind of the interplay between the shelter plan and the emergency management plan generally.
Yes, sir.
And if we could, just in communication with the body, sort of highlight some of those components about those what we might call mini disasters that may not rise to the FEMA level.
And we can get copies of both of those other plans that are
Yes.
separate from but related to this one.
Yes, sir.
Can I quickly respond to his?
Well, let me get Carol, but I know you've probably got the same thing in mind that I.
School system, yeah, I'm responding. to that.
Really easy. There's gonna be a link to this whole plan in the agenda report, I assume. That
Yes.
we're gonna,
Yes.
can we also put a link to it in this work session thing? Cause that's what I was like, when I looked at this, I was like, is this the whole plan? There was no mention. It just had plan on it. Didn't mention that. That would be good. The other thing is, is someone looking at a plan, I'm looking at recommendations. Are the mitigation strategies, the recommendations that are in here? Does that assume that these are all new mitigation strategies and that there's a whole other bunch of strategies that already exist?
There's some that already exist, right? Correct. So the strategies that we've added are just added to the list of already existing strategies.
But on these pages where it has mitigation strategies, these are new mitigation strategies.
Not necessarily. If it's something that we've already agreed that we need to do this, and we just haven't done it yet.
Are there some that are completed that aren't on there at all? Is there?
Yes, ma'am. The ones that we've completed, we remove from the mitigation plan. If it's something we've completely satisfied, yes, ma'am. And they could be very
Is there
specific.
any other place where if I'm looking for recommendations from you all that are listed, is there any place else in the document? I'm looking at the table of contents that I would look for. I was kind of looking for recommendations or summary at the end and I didn't see something like that.
Well, there should be a spreadsheet throughout the document that basically has all of the
The mitigation,
mitigation.
that would be the
70,
place to be looking for.
all 72. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Recommended. There's not anything else that I'm.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Rock. I kind of feel you contemplating the facilities question from a school district.
Yeah, just quickly, with the school system, since I helped put that plan together, they use their own facilities, house students or whatever, so that may not be in place, Commissioner Wood, because they got their own mitigation plan that they use. After hours maybe, but still, it may not be in place, because I will set that up to make sure that they have faculty, kids were secure first.
But if we're talking about a situation where like, say, kids like the whole family's displaced by a storm, it just seems like we would want the two plans to talk to each other. Because obviously CCSD is not gonna like put up the kids separate from the parents or something, right? So.
Mainly during the school hours, and I guess, the hours could be a possibility, right there. Know that those things come into play, so.
Melissa.
Yeah, I just have a quick request. Can we get a copy of this document as a PDF? I have giant blank spaces in my document because I got this doc.
Sure. I think it was sent out to the agenda item as a Word document, but I can send it as a PDF. Absolutely.
Because I'm not seeing a such.
Nikki sent an email with
Is there a PDF?
hazard mitigation plan was in the email.
I pulled it from Nikki's and it came through as a doc.
Go get a PDF version.
Yeah.
Ovita, and then we're gonna move on to Cherokee.
Oh, I guess, Commissioner Hull opened up, a concern for me, not a concern, a question or a thought. So the school district has a mitigation plan and we have a mitigation plan.
The school district has emergency action plans for every one of their schools, which we have on file, but they're pretty much the same contact people and, you know, same general plan for each location, but they have their own emergency action plan that we would work with them, you know, if they have.
And I guess that's my point. If something happens outside of the school time and a school day or those hours, are we looking forward to working with them if they have the space to cover folks?
We would explore all options. So many times in the event of a disaster, you'd have like the American Red Cross or other organizations. They will probably provide vouchers for hotels and other places as in addition to standing up shelters. Many times, you know, if we're asking for Red Cross to help us with a shelter, if they're dealing with a regional, you know, tornado that wiped out several counties, they're going to have a limited number of volunteers, but they may be able to send us those sort of things to help our folks in Athens-Clarke County, or they may be able to help us to stand out of a shelter. But we're relying on anybody within the community that we've already formed these relationships with. So there's dialogue going on.
And I guess that's where I'm, you know, when we talk about relationships and forming these relationships.
Right.
I mean, you can't say we're going to work together when Hurricane so-and-so hits. You know,
Right.
I know we just need to be ready to go into action. So that's my point. And
Right.
thank you.
That's why we do the hazard mitigation planning on like blue sky days, as we call them, because I mean, we got to think, what is the worst that's going to happen? Because in the event of an emergency, we're going to be responding. We're not going to have time for all of these plans to be formulated. We already have to have these strategies in place.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Chief Moss, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it a whole lot. Second item for any questions you may have regards to the Cherokee Road multi-use path. That plan is in the packet. So it's something that's been gestating for several years. Any questions about that?
Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward. Thank you. Thank you, staff, for this. Just what we approved was like 2.7 million, and I'm looking at a 5.4 million on. Like, is that all right away acquisition? The additional from what we approved like 3 years ago?
Sure. So what we received in the CDO back in September 2020 directed staff to move the project into design, allocated funding for design, but no funding was allocated for construction, with the intent that we come back to you and identify funding for this project. And what this agenda does really give you an update where we are, but mainly ask you the question, are you okay with the funding strategy of this project? We are proposing to move segment 2 and 3, which is the CDO, and take that into final design and right-of-way acquisition, funded with TSPLUS 2023 Bike and Ped program. And in addition to the signal prioritization program, funding $500,000 for the existing signal at Cherokee and Beaver Dam. And reminding you that signal itself was recently in the priority list approved by Mayor and Commission in April of this year, showing that signal on top of the list. So we found that the timing is good for us to present this to you and get that approval for funding and moving forward. Also, we are wanting to talk with the Lexington Road TAD committee, who were in discussion back then. Staff were informed that there might be some funding available through TAD for construction of this project. So we'll be talking to the TAD committee and to Elka and her team and see if there's any interest of supporting this project. A meeting is scheduled actually on September 12th to talk about that.
Any others? Carol?
Yeah, just a quick, so it's segment 2 and segment 3 that will be moving forward with the funding. And segment one is that part that's closer to Lowe's where there's already existing sidewalk. It's just less inferior, it's inferior sidewalk to what we have planned.
Correct.
Right. Okay, that's great. I was really happy to see that section 2 and 3 were the ones being suggested for funding.
Ronnie, thank you very much. I
Thank you all.
appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Last item before we get into the presentations are the updates and revisions to the Athens in Motion Plan. Stephen Bailey, both Works Director, is here to answer any questions you might have about that.
Forward.
You have one question about this one.
Yeah, sure. Just,
We were talking about the transit plan recently, and I guess I'm just curious if you or Manager Jones could speak to the interaction between the two plans. Specifically thinking about project prioritization and the timelines for projects, if we're trying to build out transit infrastructure and we want people to be able to get there on a sidewalk, but also is alternative sidewalk and bike infrastructure maybe less necessary where there's a bus if we have other places that aren't serviced by transit.
So I do know that our consultant is, one of their very first next steps is data collection, and they've already given us a list of the data they'd like to have, and one of it is the transit plan data. So I imagine that would be part of what they're looking through as they prioritize.
And so the transit plan is going to be done before this is done, right?
Well, this is just an update.
Yeah.
But I suspect they're probably a different timeline.
This says 2025.
You'll know when the transit plan's gonna,
By the end of the year.
That's what we-
okay. Yeah, that's, then that's good timing. We'll be working with data late this winter and
So I guess just to follow on, can you help me understand like how the transit plan may affect, for example, if a substation is going to be built and new stops are going to be put in place where there isn't currently transit, with that,
identifies.
how would that affect the priorities of like ped infrastructure in those areas?
So we're prioritizing gaps, filling definitely between, let's say, a residential neighborhood and the closest bus stop. So we have our existing bus stops that we use now, but if they have some identified for future implementation, that would help as well. And then part of the criteria that we use for actual prioritization of capital projects, there's about a 10 or 15% that goes towards transit accessibility. So that would also be incorporated into the big project.
Thank you.
I guess, this is for, interim assistant manager. So, all of that big title. So I guess my thought now, where my concerns are about the transit, plan, out on 441. So we're going, before anything really takes off and something finalized, we will have some thoughts or input.
Yes,
Okay,
that's right.
okay,
You specifically.
okay.
Carol?
Yeah, so basically what we're looking at is giving you the go-ahead to work with the on-call consultant to do an update of the Athens in Motion plan, right? And the online consultant is
Oh, I'm sorry, I said it.
consultant.
It's Tool. I'm different. I'm sorry.
It's Tool.
Tool.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yep.
Quick of you.
Another question, and as you're doing this, I've gotten a lot of calls about North Avenue. And is this part of your plan that you're working on?
Like the North Avenue corridor project. So it's, North Avenue was identified in the original Athens in Motion plan. And so it's a project that would be built, once it's built out, absolutely helps the Athens in Motion plan. This is the bigger countywide plan update that we're talking about today.
Okay, so when we talk about the bigger build out of action,
Yes.
that's another conversation.
That's what this consultant will help us build.
But I hope that you're going to, no offense to Athens in Motion, but there's a lot of mixed feelings about it. So let's make sure that just because something was presented a few years ago, that whatever is going to be recommended, that there's some input. I really am bothered with a lot of what I've seen in this community, because only one group seemed to work very closely with TPW. And I hope that we're going to make sure that conversation is a little wider than one organization.
And that's a really good point, because one of the reasons you do these updates every couple of years is because values in the community change, the voices in the community change, the context of the roads. So that's exactly what we're trying to do, is incorporate brand new or improved public engagement widespread to figure out the values that we used before, the priorities we used before. Are those still valid? Do we need to change these? That's absolutely right.
Thank you.
Mr. Meyer?
And speaking of that, I see down in this slide presentation, they talk about the public engagement and community outreach. I would ask you to reach out to all of us. Patrick and I are just talking finally again about having a Eastside Town Hall here, that for us to help you reach out in different parts of the communities. But I'd like intentional invite to each of us to do some sort of this input so that we can get that broad community outreach and get different voices in.
It's a great idea. Yes, I think we briefly mentioned town halls, but us proactively reaching out to y'all.
Right, using to encourage more people than it's just you all putting it out there.
Melissa?
Yeah, Stephen, am I correct in saying that having a plan like this and a regularly updated plan like this is really important, because you have these ideas and these concepts already on the ground when a funding source might present itself, like that North Avenue $25 million?
Absolutely. Yes.
Stephen, is there an intersection between, because it's come up twice, between the AIM plan and North Avenue? And if so, what might that look like?
Only in that North Avenue was originally identified as an Athens in Motion project, and that the ideas for the type of infrastructure that could be used in that project are some of the ones recommended in the Athens in Motion plan. Is there anything you'd add to that, Danny?
Yeah, just that when we went after the grant funding for North Avenue, that was based on its priority within the Athens in Motion plan. So it was one of the original Athens in Motion Tier 1 projects, and its funding was based on the determination to go after federal funding was based on the costs, and just the amount of money we had locally wasn't going to be enough to do really what needed to happen on North Avenue.
So what does that mean for implementation? Once we get to implementation, what does that mean?
So for implementation, this is really looking at what do we want our future vision of the Athens bike, pedestrian, transit, all active transportation connectivity, including roadways. What's kind of the vision of that in, let's say, 50 years? And then from there, the prioritization tells us, based on what our metrics are, our prioritization criteria, which those are we're looking at updating those. And then based on those weights, you would get kind of a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And from there, you can take those tier 1 projects and you can identify funding sources, whether that's T-SPLOS, whether that's federal, state, we got TAP grants. There's a lot of different sources of funding. So when it really gets into implementation and what we see on the ground, the Athens in Motion plan really looks at the broad overview of, this is the type of connectivity, based on high speeds from vehicles. This is the amount of safety that we really need for vulnerable road users to experience as they travel this corridor. From there, how that safety is accomplished, whether it's a separated path or slower speeds, those are things that can be identified on an individual project level.
And just as this is illustrative of the reason for the plan, which is just to say, let's have a community that's safe and where resources are accessible. So appreciate the work on that. Very quick question for you.
Very quick question. I would just, it would be helpful, you probably might be in here, a pie chart that tells us how much money we get from non-ACC funds for transportation. Because so many of those now, and I always got to remember that these plans all help getting that federal funding. So
a larger
reminder of that, like on the North Avenue one would be good for me.
Very quickly. What we're going to look like down the road. I get that. And I'll send this out to all of you. I have, from the former manager, I have a breakdown of how much we actually spent on, pedestrian paths and roads compared to infrastructure and other. We spent 3 times more on this vision that some folk have than some basic infrastructure and some things that could have been cheap. So I share that district, that area with Commissioner Lynn, and we definitely have different opinions of how it should look. Also, we thought, because I would not have went out and got signatures in support of the raise grant if I knew you just wanted to do some bike paths. I thought we were also going to tackle the bridges, which are totally dangerous. And now I find out we're not doing the bridges. So I do appreciate Stephen's point. You got to look at this where we are now. Whatever happened before, if things change, we got to change with it. The bridges are much more dangerous, both of them, than a bike path. So I just want to put that out there, that I like Carol's idea about community input from a larger group of people, but you can't hold us to something that conditions have changed. We've got to change with it.
Great. So, we're going to come to you all in the next month or two to talk specifically about North Avenue and the changes that had been made. That's a really good point to bring up there, of the whys behind that. So we can absolutely talk more about that.
Do you have time for me to add one thing to those questions?
Very quickly.
Okay. One of the things was, I think, was that funding for TPW specific, or is it all bike paths? Because I know there's been a lot of Greenway and Firefly funding.
It was
as well.
all. And I guess my point, so yes, it wasn't just our department, but one of the things y'all also have coming up is T-SPLOST 2026, which is a good time to talk through types of infrastructure and the privatization of funds. So that's also coming up very, very soon.
And we also have enterprise money that could be used for some of this stuff. So let's not just sit on stuff when we got another pot waiting for something else. That's what I'm saying. Let's look at all the funding and build the safest roads. Because I don't want people to think I'm just anti-bikes, but it definitely is not my priority when it comes to some other things.
All right, okay, we have 3 presentations we're going to move into now. Thank you, I appreciate it, Steve. First presentation today is the College Square concept. You might remember that we have funds approved through the T-SPLOST program for College Square, and we now have a enhanced funding opportunity given our sort of new dynamic in regard to downtown parking revenue. And so we're going to hear from Josh Hawkins, our capital projects director, and David Lynn, co-director of the Downtown Development Authority, about College Square. And I like this future vision that we have on the slide right here. All right.
So before Mayor, Commissioners, good afternoon. I wanted to throw this slide up here before we get started, just to kind of allow us to shift gears, get us thinking about College Square. Have y'all seen this image before? I hadn't seen this before. I thought it was fascinating. And I think old maps and old images like this, I could just spend forever just looking at them. As we go through this briefing, I want you to be thinking about, in the background, kind of what the significance of this landmark means to you as individuals, but also to Athens. Hopefully, at the end of this presentation, you just kind of get excited about the project. You get to determine what experience folks are going to have when they visit this space for probably the next generation. My name's Josh. I'm your Capital Projects Director. I'm going to get us kicked off here, and then I'm going to turn it over to the Downtown Development Authority and some planners that they have secured. They've been doing a lot of homework that they'd like to share with you today that we're excited to provide. This is kind of the flow of how this presentation is going to go. Again, I'm going to get us kicked off. I'll turn it over, and at the end, I'll come back and we'll talk about, okay, we're ready to move, Josh, what's next? How did we get here? I'm told that you can go pretty far back in history when it comes to this space to describe how we got here. I chose not to do that. I chose to start with 2020. What I see is that in your history, early 2020, COVID hits. And among the many ways that it affected our lives, one was we kind of had a new demand for outdoor space. And it created an opportunity to kind of try out an idea that had been around for a while, and that is to limit or restrict vehicle traffic to this space right here and allow pedestrians to use it. So you took that opportunity to temporarily shut that down to vehicle traffic. During that time period, you collected a lot of data, and that data apparently showed that this isn't a bad idea. We might want to do this permanently. And that's exactly what you did. At the end of that trial period, decided in April of 2021 to permanently close that section of College Avenue to vehicle traffic and look for ways to fund kind of some improvements to make it even more pedestrian friendly than it already was. Keep in mind that at the time that in April of 2021, at the time that we permanently closed this portion of College Avenue, the T-Splosh project didn't exist. So the commission defined option that we're going to look at here on the next slide that was put together was not in the context of a SPLOST project. Now later, a little more than a year later, enter T-Splosh. Now we have the voters approved that referendum, and on there was a project that funded a little bit. We have to do a little bit of homework, probably not a lot of visible stuff here on College Square. So among the actions that you were looking for, what this is some language that was pulled from the commission defined option in April of 2021. And to me, what this is telling me is this is acknowledging the kind of complexity of this space right here. And identifying the many stakeholders that exist, that have a presence here, and that it's kind of worthy of an extra effort to reach out for heavier than usual public engagement. And again, remember when this commission defined option was put together, SPLOST didn't exist. Now, a year later, we've got a SPLOST project, and this is an excerpt from that SPLOST project that gives us $490,000 to work with, which again is just enough to get us started. And this is the last official action that's taken place regarding College Square that I can find in our history. Now, here we are. Your Downtown Development Authority has taken the initiative to approach and contract with a design firm to kind of get things moving. They've been developing a vision and exploring some ideas about how to generate the money that's needed. But that work is what they'd like to share with you today. Before I turn it over to them, there's one more kind of graphic that's really hard to see up there. Do y'all have a version that you can see better? Yeah. All right. So I wanted to show you this graphic because I know this is what you're used to. This is what you're accustomed to seeing. Now, this process this is the SPLOST process as it's been approved and delivered to us. Kind of evolved over time to elevate certain values that have been expressed through your goals and initiatives like transparency and accountability and public engagement. At the top of there, what you'll see is a couple of touch points where in the life of a project, we're going to get on your agenda and we're going to bring something back to you to make sure that we're delivering the product that you're expecting. And make sure that we're on the right track. And underneath that, all the information underneath that's kind of what's going on in the background. And admittedly, there are parts of this process that come with some trade-offs. For example, sometimes it might take a little bit longer to do. And Sometimes it might take a little bit more money. So far on this project, we're already a little bit off script as far as the SPLOST process goes. But since the T-SPLOST project was approved, some time has passed, and ADDA's work kind of serves in place of the typical activity you would see before project concept. We can get back on the typical process if that's your desire, or we can do something different. You know, it's your process. This isn't the only way to get projects done. I just wanted to show it to you because I know this is what you're used to seeing. So I'm done with the bureaucracy part, and I think what y'all are really looking forward to seeing is kind of the vision that the Downtown Development Authority has been working on. Is this?
Melissa, do you have a process?
I'm sorry, the commission's work session, so if they just have questions, we'll be glad to answer those. Or
So any process questions before we move on to sort of design and bridge?
I do have some.
Sure.
You know, that CEO and that original vision was called for a pretty intensive public engagement. I just want to make sure that happens, that there is we have public portals and can engage the public that way, but as well as face-to-face engagement.
I think we're ready to answer those questions now, if it's okay.
Before it.
Gosh, just to introduce myself again, I'm David Lynn. I'm with the Athens Downtown Development Authority. I'm joined today by my colleague Linda Ford with the ADDA as the CEO of SPG Planners and Engineers. Ed Lane, who has a great track record of putting together urban projects here in downtown Athens, as well as in the community. I think the executive summary, if you will, of why we're here today is this is a badly needed project that the downtown community wants to see go forward. And our board, of which 2 members are here today, have challenged us to accelerate the development of that plan. And if that accelerated time schedule means paying for it out of ADDA resources, our board is willing to do that. Does that take the Athens Mayor Commission and staff out of the supervisory role, so to speak? Of course not. Everything here will be approved by you guys, and we'll move forward on that basis. This is a hybrid in that we still have a lot of unanswered questions that we're working through, most specifically about financing. We're willing to write the check. Is this a T-SPLOST project or a T-SPLOST assisted project? Our current construction estimate falls around $6 million, which we're willing to commit to. The T-SPLOST at $500,000 is less than 10% of that. But we want to proceed with a project in the parameters that y'all are comfortable with, but we also want to see this done sooner rather than usual. Later, our board put us on an 18-month time frame to get this project completed, which has raised eyebrows among staff and with our consultants. But that's where we're coming from. We want to move fast, but we want to move completely and at the end of the day, have a project that not only you're proud of, but it's going to be the most beautiful plaza in Northeast Georgia. I'd like to bring Ed up, and he's going to go.
So they get questions.
Yeah, we'll go through real quick. Y'all have seen the design that we're proposing. We presented that to most of you back in the spring at the chapel. We have pictures of that here today. If we want to go back through some of that, I think Ed would like to address some of the public engagement philosophies that we have and want to take forward, as well as the timeline of the proposed project. Ed?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. Excited to be here sharing with you. So look through here. So I know many of you are already familiar with the concept, and so I'll try to go brief through these renderings, but just as a means of a refresher. We worked on different concepts, but what kind of really gained traction with the ADDA was this stitch concept. That kind of concept came from its stitching together the civic and the academic, the east and west side of downtown, right there at the heart, as well as stitching our community together. And it was really viewed as kind of, a bigger picture of getting this access here through College Avenue, connecting City Hall down to Broad, to the Arch. And this kind of being the first step towards realizing that vision. Through a few renderings here. But the core, the heart of the vision that I think was bought into is that this is a public plaza, a gathering space for Athens used in different ways that we can't predict right now. Built with beautiful materials, built to last, and befitting the classic city. And that was kind of the idea that coalesced and really started to get some traction. Now, I know that, we look at these renderings and it can seem like we're done. There we are. There's the design, all the decisions have been made, all the materials selected, and we just need to build this. But I know as many of you know, in architecture and engineering, sometimes the concept is really the first step. And then you have what we call schematic design, design development, construction documentation, before you could build anything. And so that's where we find ourselves today, is with beginning schematic design. And in order to do that, we need some public engagement and stakeholder engagement. And so, let's see, other things. Couple more renderings here showing on ground level.
Public engagement slide.
There we go. And so I think we have a robust and targeted public engagement plan that we're going to embark on now, and would love to hear all of y'all's feedback on it. So primarily, we're looking at two different avenues. One that is general and wide, community wide, that we want to receive that input and feedback. And so using various informational and communication channels, we will kind of get the word out there through QR codes, emails, and public notices, but allow people to just be aware that this is going on and give them a way to pitch in and communicate to us their thoughts on that. And it includes here some of the ideas for that, some web-based surveys, informational websites, sidewalk boards, but just to make sure people that want to contribute have an opportunity. So that's the broad outreach. Then there is a targeted stakeholder engagement, where we are kind of selecting these that are more closely impacted by this. And even just the function of College Square, we feel like we really need to understand from their perspective what it means for them. And so I know it's hard to read, but I think in your packets, you can see kind of a list of these that, working with the ADDA, we developed this targeted list. And our approach with them is that we're going to have 3 kind of design workshops with this targeted group. And I should say for the commission at large, as we have these dates, I think it's hard to get everyone's schedule. So I think y'all would have a blanket invite to drop in at whichever one works for you all. As well as anyone else that kind of would be in that category that, you may want to join several of them. But we'll have these design workshops. We've done these before where we use some tools for it to be a very interactive kind of dynamic discussion to bring ideas and goals and challenges to the top so that we can kind of talk and wrestle with those together. And so part of our workshop will include that. And then for those that are able, there's kind of an optional part where we're going to try to invite, we would then walk to do kind of a guided walking tour of College Square itself with those goals and challenges in mind, so that we can, not just be looking at a screen, but we can be, touching and feeling, seeing it right on the ground. And of course, we'll be taking notes with that, our team, to try to get as much information as we can through this effort. There'll also be, with the public, there'll be some, at the end, some walk-in forums where advertised for a member of the public to be able to come and have hands-on kind of interaction with what's being proposed. And we're we're designing that one to come at the end because we want to know, because they're going to ask us questions. And we want to be able to answer those questions to the public as informed as we can be. And so by that point, we want to know from those store owners, the ins and outs and challenges they have. We want to know from Public Works, from Public Utilities, every city department, so that now if we're being asked a question, we feel like we can give a valuable response and then figure out how that input then fits into the larger picture as we then embark on incorporating all this into schematic design, the refinement of that original vision and concept. And, these dates are very much in progress and we're working on the interactive engagement, but we're going to use best practices here as far as these meetings are not going to be all at the same time because some will be, in the workday, some after work. There may be a weekend one to allow for people's different schedules, different levels of technology engagement. We'll try to make sure we have a broad spectrum of ways to engage. And so that's kind of our plan for public engagement. And I'll discuss just big picture the schedule before we get into budget, and I'll pass that over to Josh or David. But on schedule, I think David mentioned it right. I think we had a charge here to let's be agile and responsive here. Let's go with the momentum here. And so we're trying to be as fast as we can, but still being able to do what's necessary to do this project well. We know there's knowns and unknowns. And so we want to mitigate the unknowns, but plan well. So, but with that, we're eager to hear y'all's thoughts and questions. Questions, yeah, Melissa?
Yeah, as far as these targeted stakeholders, I have concerns that they don't necessarily meet the profile outlined in that CDO. I'd ask that, number one, you engage some of the festival organizers, especially folks that do benefit from ADDA community events funds from time to time, and the Cultural Affairs Commission. I think that those would be at the very top of the list. Those are organizations. First of all, Cultural Affairs deals with public art and public space. And the festival organizers are the kind of people who would be using the space and, have been for decades and know specifically how it's used. In order to create a vibrant public space, we want to allow for a broad set of activities and performances. It's not just like musical performances, but like we do breakdancing, unicycles, So I want to make sure that we really understand the need for, a huge range of activities to be able to comfortably take place.
Broad public engagement.
Yeah, specifically to reach out to every single festival organizers and get at least a couple reps from each of those festivals in on those initial stakeholders.
Okay. So if I can respond to what we were thinking, and this is great feedback. We were hoping to achieve this through having central services there as a kind of broadly being able to speak for all of the events that happen downtown, the logistics, all of that, and not necessarily the individual. But if that is what y'all want.
Those actual festival organizers be there because they understand the activities, the art, the vibrancy. Central services is very pragmatic, but I think the actual humans that get on the festivals and perform in the festivals and attend the festivals, it's super important to have that engaged. It's very, very important.
Yeah. Well, I'm taking notes, so we'll definitely do that. And so we may do here, and this, more engagement is good, that we may add an extra forum. The reason being, one other thing that just in our experience we were wrestling with, if sometimes the design workshop or engagement has too many people there, some people are louder and can express themselves more, and then other people will kind of be there, they'll hear it all, but they don't necessarily feel like they can express their thoughts on it. And so even the ones we have, the three that we have it designed to have breakouts to where almost there's like just 4 or 5 people around a table. So you can really get some info there. And so that is why we were somewhat trying to get representatives that would be able to speak to this. But I think you make a valid point, and if we need to add another one where we can still achieve that, we have enough room for that engagement, I think that's great.
Thanks, Ed. Allison?
Yeah, my comments are, I guess, maybe something that can be outlined and shared with us that's going to describe where y'all started talking about this is a hybrid approach. Because I already gave names for the SPLOS committee that's supposed to be working with the designated user group for the College Square project. So I don't see where the overlap is. We pay Jacobs for some of this. We have a capital director. We have ADDA. I mean, I love partnerships, but I'm not really seeing how we are, the structure of the hybrid. So that I can make sure that the people I appointed and had the description of their role is not left out. And I get phone calls about, I thought I was supposed to be involved in this. In reference to committee work where we have felt we were supposed to invite specific groups to engage with us, I have always found that when you start inviting certain groups, you're missing certain groups. And so my personal opinion is you blast with the public information about the meeting so that the public knows it's happening, which does not exclude the subsets of groups. So when you start inviting some people, other people get left out, and then it can also jeopardize camaraderie of a situation, especially with this hybrid. So I think that trying to invite everybody on a list could only be captured with, there's been so many years of special events and different people. I think that could be logistically challenging. Central Services, which is the permit for special use people, would have some of the nuances, as well as ADDA, because they're also. But I like the hybrid approach because it can go faster. It reminds me of some of LRC's work with voluntarily getting some of the work done for the neighborhood management. If a group can get another group to help. And so I look forward to seeing how this hybrid moves forward without losing the structure that we already have in place for every SPLOS project.
Patrick, I saw your hand earlier.
I can wait.
Everything you covered?
Yeah.
Carol?
Presentation being over. Yeah, now I was just matching up what was in that CDO about the diversity of people involved in this, and the list of stakeholders too. And, it says diversity of age, race, culture, socioeconomic status, artist input. And I'm not sure if I see that all there, because again, like Commissioner Wright's saying, once you highlight people, then it's really clear who's not there. One of the feelings from way back when said the downtown is not particularly inviting to people who are African American and Hispanic. And now actually this part of the downtown feels less and less inviting to me, because it seems more and more like it's just part of the university, an extension of that. So how we can get more people involved and get this to take back this, it's an integrated place, and not just a, quad for the university, I think is real important. I'm on the Firefly a lot by the student apartments, what are they, the ones that are right there downtown by the beginning of the Firefly. And a lot of that seems like an extension of the university and who's using it as such. So I am concerned about that, just in the diversity that we're looking for.
Okay. One thing on the group here, the 3 meetings, where that comes from is, we're thinking of this project again as a project and the challenges that come with that. So one of the groupings is essentially our departments to understand stormwater utilities. We were not involved in Clayton Street, but we heard about it, experienced it, just as someone who lives here. And, we just know there's a lot of difficulties. So one of them, we're going to get a very, they're not going to be telling us what they've always wanted to see at College Square. They're going to be telling us about what they need for safety access, some of the infrastructure there. So that's one of the meetings. And that's why these are hand-selected ones. They're giving specific information to the design team that we can help to mitigate as we move forward with the project. The other is the business owners, because obviously this is going to be very disruptive to them. Either, the owners of the buildings themselves or the operators there. We feel like they have special insights and information that we need to understand so that this can be communicated on the plans, and we don't disrupt their businesses and livelihood. And so that's the second group. And then the third one, we, from Historic Athens and economic development, we figured this group, we don't have individuals in this group it's so-and-so who's getting that invite. We are hoping that group will be able to tell us here's somebody that needs to be part of this targeted one, or they can help expand who else needs to be engaged, or even spread the word to that broader engagement that we are doing. And so that was kind of the purpose of the three. They're kind of going to be different than the other more general public input that we need to get. And then, and so perhaps we need to have more forums at the end of that effort with the public, as you mentioned, in some of these other groups.
Just a quick follow-up. I would label meeting group number 1 as, county infrastructure. Meaning 2, downtown businesses, so that it's real clear right up front what's going on. That makes sense. At least, if those are specific ones to have there. Whether or not there need to be others is another thing, but
okay,
I'd be straightforward with how they're labeled.
Yeah. Jesse?
Yeah, I had a design question, just about trees and shade. Getting hotter, hottest anywhere in the city is downtown, or maybe on the highway. Are those trees preserved trees or new plantings, I guess is part A, and then part B, how much do you expect to be covered in shade between now and full completion and whenever the trees grow?
Great question. Yes, because there are some existing trees there now that provide some canopy, a good amount of canopy. And so the budget numbers we have now, we figured these will have to be large, robust trees day one. Of course, they're going to grow larger over time, but it's not going to work to put a small little, 3-inch caliper. And so the budget just assumes, I forget exactly now that I think we were thinking these are $30,000 trees. They would be in chambers underneath so that root can grow. They're not just going to be in compacted soil, whether it's, some of the proprietary cells or not is what we'll get into in design development. But yes, the providing shade here, I think, is part of the vision. If it's just a sunny, hot spot, that'll be difficult to enjoy during the day.
So then I guess the follow-up question, good news on trees there. The festoon lighting that's there, is there talk about putting any of that mesh stuff or something into so that there's kind of general shade covering either over the center or maybe off to the side?
We do have to be cognizant of the fire department. They have expressed that they want this as an access way.
Yeah.
But the festoon lighting is already.
I don't think the fire department would approve that.
That's a TBD.
I think so.
Yeah, that'll be part of what needs to be developed. We have spoken about shade structures that, could be off on some of the corners to provide more, even, and it could be something that those shade structures are there year one, but maybe after 5-6 years, they can come down now when the trees are filling in.
Yeah, I guess maybe my takeaway thought then on all this is just making sure that the budget includes enough to actually have real shade structures. I'd hate for that to be the thing that gets cut and we have like beautiful ground that no one wants to be on for half the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now that we're getting into design, I just want to address the brick. And I know I in this forum when we first kind of like heard of this concept. We're talking about heat, like brick certainly absorbs more heat than white or light gray concrete. So that's a concern, like having that large expanse of dark brick. You know, I'm concerned about maintenance, you know, installation costs up front and maintenance costs in the long term. We see what's happened to the brick sidewalk along Broad Street. You know, safety hazards, you know, you've got co-eds in their high heels and people on skateboards and scooters, pushing strollers or roller skating. You know, I just want to maybe, I mean, this is just concept here, so I know none of this is written in stone, but really want us to think about the use, the underfoot use of this space and the many different kinds of users and the need for a level surface and a surface that is gonna need to be low maintenance. I know every time a keg drops on the brick on sidewalk on Broad Street, we got lots of nasty, and then the juice that seeps in between the bricks. So, I mean, I love the brick as you know, kind of a little design element. I think it works really well on Clayton Street where we have brick and lines. But yeah, I just want to make sure that this space is, it's cooler thanks to shade and trees, but also a lighter colored underfoot and that it's usable, but for many, many different purposes. I ride a scooter and I know there's a huge difference in the ride between like a smooth concrete surface and a brick surface.
So one thing on that is that I mean, a few thoughts. The brick plaza is a very, you know, I mean, there's many cities that have it. We consider this kind of a very subdued traditional design decision that was made, at least in the concept. And part of the reason is, so if we go lighter, I mean, if it's concrete, that would certainly be the cheapest, but you know, it would feel like just concrete out there. And one thing for us that, you know, concrete's great for sidewalks, but even I know on Clayton Street, it was like there's those first days really when it was first open, it had this nice clean concrete. And then it was a matter of like 2 weeks when the black gum spots start showing up and then all the other stains show up. And so for us, concrete here would be more maintenance. They at least keep it looking good. It could look great day one. And then if you go to something that's not concrete, but light, like there are large pavers, you have big slab pavers, you could do any number of paver. If they are lighter, we would have a similar issue, and then we get a little more limited because pavers can be more porous even than concrete. So then we could get into stone, but then the cost goes up with that. So really the brick was kind of us doing that trade-off. It's like, we kind of wanted to mask some of the, you know, just what urban homes look like. And the price not being, because there are pavers or stones you can get that essentially would camouflage it. They're great. You know, they just have different patterns through it that would blend in with that, and they'd be a little lighter than brick. And maybe that can be considered even for parts of it. We can afford it in the project, but because it's kind of a large area, we were trying to do the trade-off. That's at least the decision-making up to this point, but we'll be sure to wrestle with that, you know, both the heat, the longevity, and all of that.
And Ed, I mean, it's certainly been my observation that the application and installation quality makes a big difference in terms of kind of the smooth terrain of been in lots of large brick plaza areas that have been very smooth.
That's right.
Carol?
Just a quick, reiteration of that shade thing is important. I know we received something from one of the larger event organizers about, I don't know in terms of the fire department, if there are temporary ways of creating shading which are okay with the fire department over a short period of time. And with the high, I don't know. So someone wrote to us about this. Because the heat is just, I think that heat is really, really important to be looking at the trees, the shade, the color, all of that, just in terms of usability for the community. I don't want to tell you how to do it because I have no idea. But that ultimate, that ultimately is not going to get cooler, and we have so many months of the year. I mean, how many things downtown in June that are going on? It's really hot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that'll be for sure, like something we'll have to keep in mind and figure out what's the best for all the user groups and different parts of the year. I know, we hope and we believe this will be used like at nighttime, I think it can really come to life with lighting at night. And then, of course, we have a few colder months that part won't be as much. But I know I've thought of this at where our office is at Wire Park in Watkinsville. They have green there, they have some bricks, they even have fans, like giant overhead fans. But there's certain times in the day which it's just too hot to truly enjoy. I mean, you're just soaking wet, and we're just in Georgia in July, and even with some shade there. But I think you're right. We need to provide some percentage of it has to be a refuge for those days to where it can even be there. I'm sure there's going to be parts of it that is going to be hot, in the summer, but we need to provide, in addition to the trees, some refuge spaces for that.
And I'll say, I enjoy this as a starting place. Obviously, we're going to have lots of public engagement. But I think at the end of the day, what we're going to have is just a functional and aesthetic upgrade that we're all seeking. Excited about that. Ed, Josh, David, thank you. Appreciate it, sir.
Mayor, there are a couple of next steps that I think Josh might need to go through.
Good point.
Because ultimately what we want to do is be able to put an IGA together, and the IGA is going to have to be comprised of a number of different things. So project budget would be one of them. I don't know if y'all want, who's going to go through the project budget.
I'll help with that. This was a budget that I believe I have standing to since I created it 5 years ago for the original SPLOS project that was ultimately rejected by the Citizens Committee. Also put this together for the T-SPLOS Committee, which accepted it under duress from you guys at a placeholder amount of $500,000. These were figures based on some of our lessons that we learned on the Clayton Street project. The Clayton Street project was a much more extensive infrastructure project that this project intends to be. And we need to be clear about that this is a surface level streetscape beautification project. If we discover something outrageous that we have to deal with, or that we create something through this design. And we can answer questions about that. But just in general, we have a board now that really thinks outside the box. And one of your recent appointees to the DDA board suggested that we think of funding for these downtown projects somewhat differently. And that we take money that has been generated through downtown economic activity and put it back into potentially projects that generate increased economic, cultural, social interactions. And we found that, and you've agreed, by changing the percentages of the parking management agreement, that parking, all the coins, all the usage of parking downtown brings in a significant revenue stream that can fund a conventional loan to complete this process. That in a nutshell is what we're planning to do. Linda and I, along with our board chairman and another member of our board, met with some commercial lenders. They've agreed in principle funding this project as far as talking out of my lane, but they didn't seem that blindsided or wowed by the amount of the project. So I think that as long as we can prove that we have a working relationship with the county government in terms of an IGA, and some funding, collateralization that we can move forward with this realm of funding. Commissioner Lee?
How much does one parking space generate?
Depends on the location. Just to give you an example, the 16 spaces on College Avenue before they were taken away generated roughly $250,000 a year. So the ones are along College Square, we see returns of 8,000, 7,000 annually. The ones down on Doherty Street, for example, don't bring in that much money. It's definitely a dynamic, and but we can provide data on that. Our meters collect that data as far as, turnover and how much they bring in a day. So, but depending on location, the ones around College Square, around the 2 or 3 blocks on Clayton Street, bring in a significant amount of revenue. The whole system generates, before expenses are taking out, approximately $4 million a year, if that helps. And once you whittle down the expenses, that's approximately $1 million return. 60% will go into your general fund and 40% will fund projects like this.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's pretty much that slide right there. We can also skip over that. That's what I was talking about, the bank wanting us to collateralize that PMA so they can use that as collateral. The DDA has some significant reserves as well as some property that we can use in that same regard. And always, and this is just some data that you've already seen on the amount of revenue that's brought in from parking. And last, if all else fails, the DDA has the ability to write bonds. And a general revenue bond, that risk comes to the investors and not the. So I'll turn this back over to Josh.
Sure, not quite. I mean, we would be asked to, generally when revenue bonds are issued by an authority, they ask the local government to.
You still have the back. You still have the back, but the risk is at the investor.
And with this, we're not looking at bonding.
No
No more bonds.
We're gonna take a bank bond. That's how we're gonna pay for it. We're gonna write a check.
Let's get through this and then we'll.
Oh, okay, I thought we were finished.
That's fine.
All right, so what you've heard is a vision that's been illustrated by our designers and developed by Downtown Development Authority staff, and some resources that might help to fill in the gap. We know we've got $490,000. We're ready to go. We're hearing construction costs of potentially $6 million.
$6 million.
And if we're financing, then that makes it, potentially probably more than that. How much? We don't know yet. Clearly, we've got some homework to do. But I think the next steps that you might be able to expect. First is simply looking at the proposed concept design that you've seen today. And we'll put that in your hopper for the October 1st mayor and commission vote. Well, that's just on the concept design there. And then what we intend to do, I know that you depend on staff to kind of work through the gritty details of these projects. And one of the ways that will materialize is through developing an intergovernmental agreement with the Downtown Development Authority on a variety of things. It'll cover roles and responsibilities during the project and who will be responsible for maintenance and repair after completion, insurance procurement, all the bureaucratic stuff. What has my attention right now and what I think we'll probably be working on over the coming weeks and months to develop this are these financing options. I think once we start talking to the various professionals that will be involved in this sort of thing, our options will become limited pretty quick. And I would imagine y'all will end up having some questions about that. So, and you depend on me to be able to provide those answers to you. And so that's what we're going to be working on. So this is the end of the presentation. I'm sure you all have questions and we're ready to kind of address any of those.
Any questions we haven't heard from earlier? Carol?
Yeah, and David may have explained this spaced out for 2 minutes, something or other, so I apologize. Back on the projected budget, you have the proposed budget here, and I'm looking at those costs, and here's the thing, that you may have explained. Did the scope of the project, I mean, how did the prices all go down for the construction?
Well, we were working primarily at from the lessons from the Clayton Street project that incorporated a great deal of infrastructural conflicts and relocations. We don't feel that that's going to be, the issue on College Square. And although SVG is doing their due diligence to confirm that.
But you're saying with the T-Splosh proposal?
This was originally designed as a stormwater project.
Okay,
We're not doing that.
all right, that's the part I kind of remember you saying, so that's where, that helps me, I don't have to go back and listen.
That's what the mumbo jumbo, we're not doing stormwater.
Okay, so you took the.
Unless we create something from the actual project itself.
Thank you for.
Now, as Ed's has told us before in the zone projects, this may be the opportunity for public utilities and other and private utilities to come and address concerns while the whole square is opened up. But that certainly is going to have to come from their budgets and not this project.
It could be an opportunity for us to, while it's open, for us to go in there and fix some things, and not just us, Georgia Power, AT&T. But we do want to bring to the commission's attention, we need to pay attention to what's underground. Even though we're really not disturbing, we don't intentionally mean to disturb anything underground. We be cognizant of Clayton Street, right? I was not here for Clayton Street, but I've heard Clayton Street.
There's stories.
So I just want to make sure we're cognizant of that. We've had that conversation with ADDA, so everybody knows. And these numbers may change over time just because we don't know what's under.
Yes. Love this idea. Just got a question about the project process timeline. So the completion is looking for the fall of 2027. I know some people, staff had angst about speeding this process up. I was wondering, what are some of those angst? Is it what's on the ground? Is it just the public engagement, the preliminary designs? Because we've been talking about this for 5 years.
Well, we've been talking about it since the 70s.
Yeah.
It's time to get moving on this. So, I think what we're going to find, and I don't want to get in front of the public input, you've got to take the public input and incorporate it. But I think from our discussions, I'm downtown every day and on the square every day. And what I hear from people is, well, we've already closed it. Y'all have already done the heavy lifting on that. So let's, one merchant came into the office and he took one look and said, build it. So I think that's what people are looking for, is a beautiful place for people, to attract people. I mean, College Square works wonderfully now in the sense that people use it and enjoy it. But it certainly could be 100 times attractive to people, and that would generate greater economic activity.
But to Patrick's question, maybe Nikki, this is for you. This is simply a different project delivery process. Not bad, but one that's faster. I mean, I think what I would observe is it's something of a discrete project. It's not a countywide project. And so it's probably a good project in which to look to some alternate vehicle, but just different than what we've done.
I think David explained it well when he said, this has T-Splosh funding, but it may not be a T-Splosh project. And to be fair, it's taken some time. ADDA kind of went ahead and took the initiative to move forward. So what we were trying to do is create some sort of semblance of process, right? Just appreciating the fact that we are where we are. So it's not bad. It's just not what we are used to.
I think we're also not used to another partner helping us pay for some of these projects. So.
And can we use T-Splosh 2023 to pay back the loan from the bank?
It's a teacher project.
Okay.
It's not.
Just asking.
Yeah,
Got everything, Patrick?
One more. Commissioner Who asked a question about the trees. And y'all constantly be working with GDOT for the broad?
We are, and that's a good question. You know, and Ed is always clear when he shows these renderings. This project, as envisioned today, only includes the College Square portion of that project, even though the renderings show a brick outline, a handshake, so to speak, to the UGA. That's not part of this budgeted project. However, that part has really gotten some legs there through some of our state partners. And in my previous life as commissioner and as planner, anything on Broad Street, I always treated like a hot stove. You know, that's state property. We can't touch that. Well, we've learned that GDOT has worked with some of the Gwinnett cities along Buford Highway to calm and control traffic through there. So we think that there may be a new day with GDOT, and we're looking forward to getting some help from our cross the street partner on some of that, and perhaps some of our state partners.
All right, thank you.
Jesse?
Yeah, I thought I was done, but now that we're looking at the budget numbers, slide 16, if you can go back to that one. I mean, stormwater's been a nightmare countywide everywhere. If some kind of improvements are needed on the square, it seems to me like we got to do that at the same time. So I'm just throwing that out there that I feel like we got to do that at the same time. Your point was well taken here. I think you said like, you know, T-SPLOST assisted projects. I mean, as I recall, when we were putting together this project list, that is kind of how we thought about it. I mean, I don't think that we knew that you all were going to step up like you have. But I remember putting this money on the project list, not expecting it to pay for the whole
I
building.
think we saw it as seed money for grants.
Yeah, and so like, this is honestly like a better place to be than that, I think. So, you know, I like what y'all are trying to do here generally. I just feel like we got to keep the stormwater part. And then the other thing that just stood out to me, once I started scrutinizing this further is the public art money seems to be cut down a good bit to just.
Well, the public art is based on the $500,000 figure.
Yeah, so it should be 3% of 500,000 is more than 2,000. Or sorry, 1% of 500,000 is more than 2,000 though.
It's based on construction.
One of
the construction.
based on a different number.
This is the construction. 1% of the construction. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. I mean, I see what y'all have done here. Obviously, the construction is going to be a lot more than just the portion of this that's being pulled out, but thinking of the spirit of why that's in there, it would seem to make sense. Like the overall construction cost is way above 33,000, right? Pulled out from this cost. Something closer to the 1% of 500,000 for art, to me, seems like it would make sense, especially since it's a central square where we probly want kind of nice art there.
To answer that, I think the DDA has a long track record with public art. You know, the Hot Corner Music Legacy mural, we were largely instrumental with that. Other public art projects. We think we're just setting the table for these public art projects to come, but we have to get them.
Any others? All right, everybody who's working on this, thank you so much. Looking forward to the next couple of agenda cycles.
Thank you.
All right, we've got coming up for presentation and discussion, the performance audit of employee recruitment, hiring and orientation within our human resources office. As y'all know, human resources does an enormous number of things, offers benefits, does retiree support, does internal management and monitoring. But this internal audit was just this component of human resources function. So Auditor Hassemer is getting set up now.
You got refill it.
Gavin, glad to have you here.
All right, thank you. Let me grab my notes here.
That's what it has in the budget. It's not required in that report.
Yeah.
Learn.
All right.
No.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today's presentation will focus on the last audit assignment stemming from our FY24 work plan. This audit supports 10 initiatives across 4 strategies within 2 goal areas of your strategic plan. I'd like to personally thank the HR staff for their cooperation and assistance throughout the process, and also acknowledge the hard work of management analyst Judy Johnston and Katie Roth within our office to put this together. Real quickly, my goal today is to briefly talk with you through the key points and highlights of the report, but also emphasize that the report is full of valuable information from both front to back cover. A couple of the sections within the report that are worth noting are proposed here in your outline, and we'll touch upon each one of those in a slide. Here's our objective and scope that was originally determined at the onset of our FY24 work plan back last year, and I feel strongly that we stuck to that. Previously completed audits from our office that have come before you in recent months were a bit different by design. In particular, a comprehensive performance audit, which is what this is, occurs over a longer period of time, and it tends to be a major in-depth review of a particular project or program, as opposed to a periodic audit that captures the pulse of the department at a point in time. From a process standpoint, over the last 6 months, over a period of 6 months, staff worked with our HR department staff to gather information, research information, conduct field work, perform testing across roughly 131 hours of cumulative staff time in a period of 21 days. We also took it upon ourselves to look at and review 13 different municipal entities across 4 different categories for comparative purposes. Historically, our human resources department in general has consistently been a function of this government that has garnered attention, and for good reason, given its significant role. Ever since unification, where we took the City of Athens Personnel Department and joined it with the Clarke County Personnel Department, we've been pretty good at periodically looking at how that is working out. And so there was an overview commission report in 1996 and in 2000 that ultimately touched upon human resource department in general, as well as some of our recruiting strategies. Although it's been roughly over 20 years, there were previous internal audits done by our office, both in 1995 and in 2001. Now, one thing to consider is that although we had a specific objective in mind that focused on employee recruitment, hiring, and orientation, these functions have to be taken into the context of the department's overall operations, which are highlighted here on this slide and also in the report. That includes looking at the financial side of things, specifically the employment division, which handles most of our hiring and recruiting, as well as just the general operations of the department from staffing purposes, including the number of positions, their own vacancy rates, their own workloads, as well as some of the initiatives that have come about in the last couple of years that have taken a lot of their time, which includes our human resource information system setup and the new initiative of DEI workforce coordination as well. So if we look at the 3 processes that are involved with essentially staffing our government, the first step is recruitment. It begins with a position vacancy and sort of ends for our purposes when a posting closes and applications are then referred on to the hiring department. When we talk about our workforce, finding new employees, there's a difference when we're attracting candidates between sort of passive recruitment and active recruitment. And so there's an advertising and marketing side of recruiting, and that can be anything from just simply posting the position and allowing individuals to find it themselves, to actively going out and seeking individuals to apply for a position. This is also where we're introduced to some of our staffing software, which in this particular case is NeoGo. It's a platform that we use to accept applications, that we sort of monitor the applications through the process, and also keep some of our information from a job description standpoint. Our main priority with each one of these steps is to work with HR staff and sort of outline step-by-step the workflow that is involved in each one of these stages. And you can see that here on the screen. When we go into the next phase, which is the hiring phase, this is by far the most intricate of all three phases. This is where it involves screening applicants, interviewing applicants, determining a candidate, salary negotiations, and ultimately filling out all the forms and paperwork that get the person in the door starting on day one. So this is a lot bigger workflow, a lot more steps involved. During the course of this audit, as you can see from a period of 12/22 to 11/23, the data basically indicated that we were averaging about 102 days to fill a position. Now, there's a number of impacts that affected that timeline, but that was roughly the average that occurred in the period. I think we have since a number of reasons improved upon that process as well. Hiring can certainly differ amongst departments. Every department is different. Every department has different demands and different requirements. And so there are a lot of if-then scenarios in this stage. If you're working with the police department, it's not go straight to hire, it's testing. And then we go to hire. So there's a lot of different stages that can occur throughout this process, depending on the type of department we're talking about. The other thing that became very clear is that although we do have minimum qualifications and we do screen for qualifications, they are not easily quantified. They are very subjective. And that is just a natural course. That is not unique to our HR department. That's unique to any HR department, that I may interpret someone's background from an experience standpoint differently than you interpret their background and experience. When we get to the final stage of our hiring process, get to orientation. This is essentially the formal introductory event for new hires. It includes paperwork, benefits, going over administrative procedures as well as policies, and sort of introducing staff to the government as a whole as well as the community. There is a difference between orientation and onboarding. Sometimes they're simultaneously talked about. Orientation is essentially, here is your beginning point. Here are the forms that we get you started and in the door. Onboarding is, here's how you do your job. Here is the steps that we will work with you continuously over your probationary period to get you into your unique position and get you started. Again, went over the workflow of what's involved in our orientation process. COVID spurred a lot of this. We have sort of not gotten away from what occurred during COVID, where it went to a completely online orientation process, and the majority of our orientation is still online at this point in time. There are some in-person events that do take place, but not to the same degree as, say, 10 years ago when orientation was an all-day long process. In-person adds to the happening. So I won't go through each one of these. You've all been issued the report. You'll have this as well, but there were 6 different findings, 6 major findings, and within each one of those findings, there were a number of recommendations that staff made. There is also the response from the department and management as to whether there is a disagreement, partially agree, or agree with the recommendations that were made. So real quickly, just some of the findings that we observed is the software program that we do utilize is not to its fullest degree. There are other parts of that software program that exist that can help us in other ways in this overall process that are not fully being utilized at the moment. As far as the RHO process, recruitment, hiring, and orientation, there is a bit of inconsistency and a lack of understanding among some of the practices between both HR and the departments that they serve. Finding number 3 talks about how although a lot of what spurs out of RHO can be quantified, we're not in a position right now that adequately gathers that data and is making decisions based on some of that data. So we've asked them to look into that. Finding number 4, we do feel that recruitment and hiring, especially regarding our local force, could benefit from a little more flexibility and agility in some of our processes. We're not at all saying that we do anything illegal or that we go against established policy, but there is room that exists to sort of go outside the traditional norms of typical practice. The 5th finding was that employee retention, which is essentially keeping the workforce that you have, needs some additional goals. One of the main things that we found when it comes to recruitment, hiring, and orientation challenges, you can subvert all of those challenges if you just keep maintain the workforce that you currently have. So retention is a big key issue to this. And then finally, just within the department itself, cohesion and specificity of mission, goals, and strategy as it relates to recruitment and retention. Sort of getting back to the main purpose of what an HR department is there for. What is its main purpose and its main function? This is certainly one of those practices that you sort of need to revisit and refocus on. So as with any audit, and we're not necessarily prepared to go into specifics with this one, but it's important for us to show that there's value in the audit that was completed, that also staff recognizes some of the initiatives that have come out of the audit, and that we're tackling some of the low-hanging fruit even prior to you all really getting into this audit and sort of accepting the audit. And one of those things is branding. That is an initiative that became very clear during the audit, and there are things that our communications department is actively pursuing and will continue to pursue and likely bring those to your attention as we go forward. But again, good to see that strides are already being made in terms of this particular audit. Real quickly to sort of close it all up, we were at a roughly 62% partially agree response over 26 total recommendations. A few considerations to just keep in mind with this particular audit. This was not a compensation study. You as a commission have already approved a separate entity to conduct that compensation study. We did not want to duplicate those efforts, although we will acknowledge that RHO goes hand in hand with compensation. So it'll be interesting to see what that study comes up with. Retention is certainly key to many of our challenges, as is time. There are certainly processes involved with any government practice, but there is always room to improve upon those practices and gain efficiency in some of the time. And when we're talking about recruitment and hiring, time is a key factor in all of this. A few themes that we saw is we certainly do have a qualified professional staff in our HR department, and we recognize the fact that they have done a fantastic job in the interim over these last couple of months, especially with an interim director, interim assistant director. They've kept the wheels turning, and the foundation is in place. I don't want any of you to come out of this thinking that, the wheels are falling off the bus. That is not the case, and that's not what we're trying to portray here. We have a great staff in place. But as with anything, there's always room for improvement. I think we tend to take a more reactive than proactive approach with some of our recruiting. And we've, through no fault of their own, I think it's essentially them wanting to see or hear direction from you all as a commission or from management as to whether or not they maintain the status quo, the way we've been doing things, or are they given different direction in the future to try and implement some new ideas and new initiatives. So next steps, this will be on your agenda cycle for September, October. You'll see this commission item next week. Again, implementation I know is just as important as the audit itself. And so I would encourage you that during the discussions of the agenda item on this cycle, although you're simply voting to accept it or not, your comments certainly will be heard from both us as operational analysis and I think from management, that acceptance with an understanding that we will pursue items A through B, whatever, with regard to things that you feel are very important when it comes to some of the recommendations. And as with any audit, we'll certainly look to follow up with our HR department on some of these initiatives within the right time frame. So happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thanks, Gavin. Questions from the body? Patrick?
Well, first of all, your last, I should drink some water. Last audit assignment for FY 24?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Kudos to you. So just for GOC, that we are working on employee engagement and just keep this in consideration as we move forward with that. But just a question about the 102, it may be beyond the scope of what you, the work that you and staff have done. The 102 days to hire, that typical for government, that average, and do this staff department say, that's too long of a time where good candidates don't want to wait that long and they take the first offer?
Sure, and I think we speak to it a little bit in our full report, but essentially 102-day average is not atypical for governments, especially some of the ones that we looked at. There were some that took longer, there were some that took less. There's a number of factors that go into that. What I would say is, not only us as operational analysis, but HR itself would certainly agree that there are ways to improve upon that time frame. It is not strictly the HR department. I will say that during our analysis, it is just as likely that some of the departments that are doing the hiring themselves sometimes lag in their responses to HR. And so even if HR is within a day's time reporting that a position is now posted and ready to go and advertised, the department itself may wait a week or two to respond back and say, yeah, go ahead and do that. Well, that's 14 days. What I think we also find is it's not so much a competition with other governments, although there are certainly those things to consider. It's the private industry that we also compete with, and whether or not the private industry can get people hired faster. And I think that is honestly something that we're maybe more competing with when it comes to time frame.
Thank you.
Jesse?
Thanks. This is great. So for what Patrick said, congrats on getting through the whole slate. And they've been great reports. I guess my first question is the disagreements. And maybe this is something to more note in the agenda setting and vote, but I'm looking especially at finding number 2, 11. And it's like all disagree. And kind of, I guess my two-parter here, why I'm looking at this is not only because it's all disagree, but also because they're ones that when I read it, I feel like I agree, but it's like, are they disagreeing because they feel, how much of that's about like, we're already doing this versus we disagree that we should do that at all? You know what I mean?
Well, I think, and that's a great point. I think with a lot of our audits, it's a learning process, not just for you all as the commission, but also for the departments that are subject to the audit. And although we try to explain this as clearly as we can, I think at the end of the day, sometimes with confusion about the recommendation and the response to it is not necessarily tell us if you agree or not agree that you are currently doing something, but that you could, or that the potential is there. And I think sometimes there's some confusion about that. And so as you read the responses, there's a couple of them, I think, that you'll come across and you'll say, well, I think they just acknowledge that they are doing it or are about to do it. So it may not actually be disagreement, it might be partially agreed. And I think some of it also stems from we don't currently do it because that's not the way we've been asked to do it. That's not the way we've been told to do it. But it's not necessarily that there is a law or a reason that we can't do it. It's just we're lacking the direction to do so. So I think specifically with regard to finding number 2, where you see disagreement is that That is not their current practice when it comes to recruitment. They essentially acknowledge that recruitment has never been a function of our HR department. They're not funded for it. They haven't been given the directive to do it. So therefore, those are the answers that you're getting, is that it's based on, we don't currently do that. We haven't done that. But I would also interpret that as it's not impossible to do.
And to be fair,
Sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, I mean, just thinking about this, you know, is it your expectation for commissioners and the public at large that when they read the department narrative, that will flesh out some of these questions?
I do think so. Yes.
Right. And to be fair, as far as recruitment, I think there's a definition that's probably could be created around recruitment, because we do recruitment, but maybe not in the sense of, maybe not to the extent that we should or could or others do, but we do recruitment, right? We post positions, right? We go through the process, but maybe it's not as robust as, you know, other communities.
And another thing that stuck out to me is specifically recommendation number 3. And I've heard anecdotally enough different times from enough very different sources that I start to see a pattern that we end up like, HR ends up filtering out a lot of applicants that the department probably would have considered qualified. And they never get there. And then that department can't go back and be like, can I see who else you didn't send? Whatever. And so specifically recommendation number 3 under finding number 2, allow hiring managers the choice of viewing all applications if they so desire. Would seem to me like some low hanging fruit. It's just like, if they would desire, then they could, you know, there's no money there or anything. Maybe we would see something good come of that.
I think HR, they would note, if I'm going to put my HR hat on, that, you know, folks didn't make it through the filtering process for a reason. And then there were very specific questions that they had to answer yes or no to. And sometimes people answer untruthfully as well as they get through.
Understood.
So I think that, you know, they would argue that, hey, we have this filtering process here for a reason. And, you know, also, what I see us doing in the future is putting more onus on the hiring managers to create questions of their own. So the hiring manager needs to create questions of their own, give those questions to the HR. That process is really not in place completely today. So that's.
I've also heard maybe that there's, and this is where I wonder if like, if a department head could just see, oh, these are the people who applied that need to move through. Maybe they would realize that something that they put in place as a requirement should actually be a nice to have. You know, and then it would boost candidates' status in the application process, but it wouldn't just keep them out of it because they don't have this degree. I suspect that there's things like that going on that maybe just the ability to do a bit more of this would help that understanding along, but I also hear your point.
And let's keep in mind why we have some of these things in place. At one point in time, you know, people apply and they would not meet the minimum requirements, and they knew the hiring manager could find their name, pull them out of the hat instead of them going through the process. You know, I just want us to be cognizant of that, not to just be defending HR, but that's part of their training.
I had 2 other things, and they can just be answered in email because I know we're pressed for time, but just to say them in case others are interested too. One is, I'm curious if you mentioned the private sector, that's like where we're losing people to, but my understanding is we're also losing a lot of people to Metro Atlanta, and that might just be like Metro Atlanta public sector. So was there any discussion in this around like factoring in Metro Atlanta and the way we think about our like market competitors?
Yeah, I mean, so real quickly, the comparative analysis section of the audit report will go into detail about the specific 13 different jurisdictions that we looked at. Many of them were within a 65-mile radius, including some like Gwinnett that are in the Metro Atlanta area. And so I think it goes into a little bit of detail of what they're currently doing versus what we're doing. But yeah, ultimately, that is something that we did see, is that distance itself is not a automatic exception to someone applying for a job. That, you know, someone is willing to drive the distance, whether it's drive here or drive elsewhere, for a specific job, depending on what that job brings them.
And then the last question I had was, did you get into it all, like whether HR does or has considered or would consider having a role in supporting other agencies who have positions that are funded entirely by the commission? So a couple of examples of this would be the co-responder teams. that Advantage has like been, struggling to, is there a role that HR could play in like helping them fill that, since that's a program that also collaborates with our police department and has great benefits to us, but also that we fund. And then like another example, maybe this isn't the best one because I think there's mixed feelings on what to do moving forward, but like the neighborhood leaders that do.
Commissioner, we did not. We stuck solely with, ACC defined metrics for what our current employees are. It's not to say one way or another, we just did not study whether or not that was possible, so.
Dexter and Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Gavin. Well, I think one time we all consider, we got a new director now at HR. I think my recommendation would be give her an opportunity to get her feet wet, review this report, and then come back to us. Along with our Commissioner Hoover, I'm concerned about some of the agreements that are in here. That are, look at the report in detail and come back to us later on. Actually, 90, 120 days, go by it and see what she may be. Some they work with her staff along with getting these things done. So to be fair to HR, they can get some of these things, some of this agreement, like I just said, it won't cost us anything. I think you can easily implement them if you want to. So I think we give her an opportunity to take a look at it.
I would agree.
I was going to reiterate that as well. I think that's really important to just build that in as something to get back to us. Because the people who were responding to this were not the director nor our assistant director. Am I correct in that?
They're correct. They were the interim.
Right. So, in terms of thinking creatively out of the box, doing things differently, they haven't been in a position to have that responsibility on them. And that's asking them to do something that was a little different. I'd also like to have the attorney look at some of this too, because for example, I actually grabbed the full report today because I got it a paper copy. I know it's been distributed to everyone, and I really would recommend reading these recommendations and the responses because they're quite, interesting and detailed here. But the disagreement on that one about not having the department heads be able to look at the applications seems to be based on some sort of legal analysis, saying as such allowing hiring managers to view all applications would violate this ordinance. So it might be good to get the attorney's office interpretation. I don't know if that's brought up anywhere else, but I just saw that. I thought that was important. Great report, lots to review and grow on. So this is exactly what we want, right?
Just real brief. I didn't get a full report. Is it an email?
Yes, I can read that. Yes.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Yeah.
I didn't see in this, but like, were exit interviews discussed much in your analysis? And like, if and how they're used, how the recommendations are incorporated to the change in recruitment and retention?
Yeah, so we did ask, ultimately, Commissioner, the answer is that we have gotten away as a government from, roughly over a decade ago where we required exit interviews to where they are not required. They are not necessarily performed by HR currently. I don't know how much COVID may have played into that. But it's ultimately up to the departments right now that if they choose to have an exit interview as a department, they can certainly benefit that. I have done that myself in another department. But it's not something that I necessarily forward on to HR. It's not something they necessarily collect currently or that they perform. And so there was no real data to use or analyze with how the exit interviews may have portrayed some of the responses. But I think it's something that HR does recognize is or can be valuable and perhaps will look to instill again in the future.
Yeah, I guess just throw in there, that seems like a pretty obvious low hanging fruit as well. Or at least to start making sure that any ones that are currently get passed along to HR.
Just as a way to cast a wide net, gather a lot of data. I like the idea of a comprehensive exit interview protocol. Yes? All right, thank you, Gavin, I appreciate it. Okay, and finally, today, we are going to get a general fund preliminary financial report. I know your agenda says FY twenty-four. FY twenty-four, of course, has moved on, and we're in FY twenty-five, and we're beginning to anticipate what we need to be thinking about for FY twenty-four. Glad to get to hear.
Oh, good.
Here's some exciting material. Nice doorstop for everybody.
I don't know. Can you explain the additional graph photo? I thought was like, seems good. Don't shoot.
Same as what we've already got, or has it been on?
Only thing that's different is the last page, the handout.
This is. That's FY 25. This is. I will hold on to the thing that happened. That's all they. 24.
It's gonna be a little more than that.
Here. FY.
I like that you say.
I did FY 24. This is what we're looking at last year's, right? It's the closing count. This threw me off. There,
Okay. I know, there was a reason to putting this last. I just want to start out by saying that this is not, I'm going to say the purpose of the presentation is to provide a general overview of the general fund financial condition and trends, but it's also, if you read it carefully, it's to provide financial decision-making tools for the next budget process. And these tools are not new. They've been around a long time, but they're generally not, they're in the budget process, but as we'll see differently in just a minute, there are different contexts. So I want to say that financial decision tools, not policy decision tools. These are financial tools that you can use in the next budget process that it'll make it clear what I'm talking about today will impact financial trends going into the future. But even though we're not talking about policy, it does need to be understood that all policy, whether it's the federal government mandates it, the state government mandates it, or it's local policy, it's all converted to math, or what we call dollars. And it's done through two processes. One is the budget process. So you will see all policies that are in that budget ordinance that you pass, they all get converted to math in that budget document. And then separately, and this is what the confusing part about it, is they will be converted to a financial reporting process that the independent auditor gets up here and bores you to death with in February of every year. That's a whole different reporting process. So what we're trying to do today is close the terminology gap between those two processes. And let me give you an example. The last page of that paper handout you got is page B7 of the fiscal year 25 budget. All right. Now, the budget is formatted in a certain way because it has to show ultimately that we have balanced the budget. That's state law. We have to do it. But the financial statement reporting is different. So an example of this would be, if you look at the revenue section of the 25 budget, it says prior year use of fund balance. So that's shown up there under revenue so that it all balances out. But when we get to the financial statement presentation, it shows up as a deficit. Okay, who uses that? Well, rating agencies do, financial institutions do. Everybody uses that financial statement format.
So it's important to bridge the gap between that terminology, because otherwise, when we talk about things during the budget process, you know, you got to understand the total implication of that. And that's what we're trying to do today. I also want to start out by saying we had a remarkably good run fiscal year 19 through 23. I mean, it didn't seem to matter what was happening globally, the pandemic, whatever. From a financial perspective, we had a good run. We had a good run, but the trend was always upward. 24, it began to trend downward. That's what we're here to discuss today, is that trend, not where we ended just in 24, but the trend going forward, because got to get our head wrapped around that for the next budget process. The trend is the most important aspect of it. So there's 3 discussion points that I would like for all of us to walk out of here with somewhat of a different appreciation of today. And the first is transfers out to other funds. I think in this presentation, you'll see where we put that out there. One of the reasons we had a deficit in fiscal year 24 is our transfers to other funds have just grown exponentially over the past several fiscal years. Need to also understand the impact of the subsequent year budgetary decisions on the current fiscal year. So for instance, when the budget was adopted in June of 24, we were still in fiscal year 24. Okay. But as you'll see on slide 10, when we adopted the budget with a deficit. Okay. Prior use was a prior year fund balance. Okay. When we did that, under the Government Accounting Standard Board rules, we had to show that deficit as a reduction of total fund balance to come up with unassigned fund balance reserve. So they're all related. All these things are related, and they all impact both years. Now, we did the same thing during fiscal year 19 through 23, but like I said, the trend was up. It didn't seem to matter because we were doing so well, you know, fund balance just kept going up. It didn't in 24. And the last thing are the inflationary impacts on the government's financial condition. And by this, we mean mitigation of inflationary impacts versus just reacting to them somewhere down the road. Okay. This slide right here, this album came out in 1973. And yes, I was alive for that. And what were the 70s? The 70s were what's called the Great Inflation. Okay. Great inflation. I remember as a little kid seeing President Ford on TV with his big win button on, whip inflation now, you know, but we went through all of this in the 70s, and then it was killed in the early 80s when the Fed funds rate went up to about 20%. So compare that in contrast to 5.25% today, 20%. I can't even imagine that. Although you would make a lot of money market funds. So when we talk about inflation, inflation has resurfaced in the last few years. In fact, if you look from July 2020 through July 2024, just the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the value of $100 in July 2020 would now take $122 to buy that same basket of goods. That's a 22% compounded debasement of our fiat currency, but that's called inflation. And it impacts every operation we do. So we have to look at that. These definitions.
I thought you were gonna say, don't shoot me, I'm only the messenger.
Well, that's it.
That's what.
I read, I saw it.
Thank you for pointing out the obvious.
Did a good job planting that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good job, David.
Yeah.
You didn't want to go that far. Yes.
So I hope,
Sorry, I ruined it.
Gently lay it out.
I hope everybody read these definitions, as boring as they are. because they are very important, okay? Not just to finance people like me, but to people actually making financial decisions. I've just stuck up there where our financial reporting standards come from, but we're going to be talking about these things on the first page in like slides 7 through 13. You're going to see how they all work. I'm not going to go through all of these. I've got the definition of nominal versus inflation adjusted. And then the last few here, the community partnership programs, all the way down to community clean energy program. I had to go in and put definitions because I pulled most of this presentation, and that section came from the fiscal year 25 budget, and most of these were in there. And so I had to go back and look up what these actually were. The community clean energy program, I don't remember being mentioned, except maybe in a sentence or two. But one of the things that struck me as I was putting this together is that every year the finance department has to put together a report that says, okay, based on this policy that was adopted in July 2020 and it updated in June 23, we have to look at which in franchise fees we brought in. We have to look at the policy and determine how much above the base amount has to be transferred from the general fund over to the Community Clean Energy Fund. When this policy was passed in July 2020, for the first couple of years, didn't make any difference because that line item was not growing very much. Now it's growing because this year for 24, we're going to have to transfer over $1.1 million from the general fund to the Clean Energy Fund. And budget actually ran a trend analysis on that basically showed that by, I think it was 2030, we'll be doing $4.5 million a year into that fund. So it will have an impact. And I'm not saying that impact is bad. I'm just saying that's one of those things will have an impact. And that report hadn't come out about the time that I was looking at this, I never would have thought about it. I do want to point out that this presentation is expressly for the dissemination of general fund financial information, and it is not meant to express opinion on public policy. But when you're talking about numbers and finance, and you're taking these from the budget document, there's going to be numbers in there that policy is converted to math, and so they show up. Also, this financial information is going to change. This is as of August 28th, so the deficit that's in here is probably going to go up before it's all said and done by another million or two before that's done. We're covering 3 topics. The first is where did we end 24? What were the trends that got us there? We're going to be looking at inflation adjusted general fund trends and some key takeaways or some factors we could consider, some policies that might mitigate that. And then we'll be looking at where we could end up in the future 2 years, 26, 27 budget process. And that's just based mostly on what came out of the 25 budget, but also some of it is being imposed on us from other sources like House Bill 581, which is the floating homestead exemption. Also, just to give you an example, we took in $5.5 million in interest revenues in the general fund in 24, and in 22 we took in $195,000. That is all due to federal fund trade. So now that's going back down. So that's going to be a factor going forward. I'm just going to slip on down here to the table. One of the reasons I put in all those definitions is you'll see all the items that are in those definitions on the left. So in contrast, so here we have, operating revenues all the way down to net change in fund balance. Net change in fund balance could be thought of as profit or loss. It's profit or loss for the general fund for the year. And, you can look at the variance over there that's positive and you can say, hey, we ended up better than budget. We did good. And we did do better than budget. But as noted in the text on the preceding 2 pages, it doesn't mean that we ended on a high note. because we had a deficit. Okay, and if you look down there at the bottom, in red, you'll see we had a deficit as of August 28th at 6.5 million. So what does that mean? I mean, it's just a number on a page. What it means is if you look at beginning total fund balance at the beginning of 2024, which is July 1, 2023, we had a total fund balance of 64.7 million. So first off, we've got to subtract that deficit from that total fund balance, and we get an ending total fund balance of 58.2 million. So right off the top, we've reduced our total fund balance. And when you see this pop up in various situations, whether it's the audit, what you see here is we went down from 40% to 30% total fund balance. That's why that number is important. If we look at the trend in revenues and all these others, you'll see that it, you know, if you don't adjust for inflation, it looks good. It looks like our revenues have grown steadily, and they have. We've been very fortunate, and this is one of the pandemic effects. We've been very fortunate that our expenditures did not rise right along with revenues all these years until 24. 24 is when everything began to normalize. That's when we began to fill positions. People came back into the office. People went to conventions. The courts reopened. Everything you normally do in a local government, that came about. So from fiscal year 22 to 23, the increase in operating revenues was greater than the increase in operating expenditures. That reversed in 24. So that means operating expenditures, even though we had a great year from operating revenue perspective, because those expenditures began to normalize as we opened back up and filled vacancies and stuff, they begin to grow faster than operating revenues. You'll see the operating surplus deficit.
Professor Boyd.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just, because there's a lot of numbers in this thing. I looked over this before. But how much, we also changed the way we were budgeting for salaries, not leaving in, like not budgeting for all the positions, but what was anticipated. Could that have affected this as well?
No, because we still came in well below budget, even though we began using that budget methodology. Remember, every year when we do a budget,
right,
we have to balance our budget, which
right,
means revenues have to equal expenditures. So in each one of those operating expenditure lines, we would finish the year, our expenditures would be 5 to 6% below what was budgeted in total. So even though we had budgeted fewer positions to, you know, as an expense, we came in even below that. So.
But that was starting in which year? Fiscal year 20?
Well, really, I mean, we started somewhere around 21 or so. But we weren't just budgeting for just the positions that were filled. We used another methodology that didn't have quite the same effect. Probably 22, maybe 23, we migrated over to the only budgeting for those that were filled. So, but that didn't have an effect really on what you're seeing here, because that was all taken into account in the budget process. But in each of those years, we had a nice operating surplus. But the one thing I do want to point out here is transfers out to other funds. That's that first discussion point I wanted everybody to take away. You cannot go from 7.5 million to 26.3 million in 2 fiscal years and have a positive bottom line. Now, we'll talk more about that in just a minute, but that's just fact. And so we went from a surplus in 22 and 23, like 14 million, 11 million, down to 6.5 million. And the primary cause of that in 24 was the transfers out to other funds, which we'll discuss in a minute. But I do want to point out that if you look at fiscal year 25, we started out with an operating deficit. We still had a high amount of transfers out to other funds, and we budgeted a deficit of $14.3 million. And that $14.3 million And 25 is going to affect our unassigned fund balance reserve, and 24 is we'll look at in just a minute. So why are transfers out to other funds going up so much? Well, there's several reasons, but you can really narrow it down to capital projects for the most part. But again, budgeting so much more for capital projects. These are things that are not covered in our sales tax programs. So these are things that are more like life cycle maintenance, some paving and things like that. And it just went from 5.6 million to 10.8 million. And then it actually went to about 13 million in 24. But then we bought the office space across the street. That was 4 million. And that came straight out of fund balance. So it was a transfer out to the capital fund. Fleet replacement. Well, fleet replacement is another fund. It's an internal service fund. And it's funded by an entirely different mechanism generally as an operating expenditure. But after the 2008 financial crisis, at some point, there was a decision made that we couldn't afford to fund fleet replacement at the full amount that had been, put into place before then. So they reduced the amount they were funding fleet replacement for years and years. And it finally got to the point to where we had to do one-time transfers out to meet the needs of fleet replacement. So we did 2 million in 23. We did another 2 million in 24. And then also in 24, we also bought fire equipment, and we had to move an additional $3 million over to fleet replacement to fund that when these trucks come in 2 years after we sign the contract. And also in 25, the budget, we went ahead and budgeted 12.5 million for capital fund again. And then there was also a $4 million one-time contribution to the affordable housing project. So if we look at this analysis here, the bottom line of this analysis is that when we get above when transfers out to other funds get above 7% of operating revenues, we have a high probability of having a deficit. Okay. So in this 11-year period from 14 to 24, we had 4 deficits. And in every one of those deficits, general fund deficits, the transfers out as a percentage of operating revenues exceeded 7% of operating revenues. There was only one exception, which was 23. And in 23, our operating expenditures were still low enough, and the operating or the transfers out were not great enough yet. Even though they were above the 7%, they still had only doubled. They hadn't gone up 12 million. They'd only gone up 7. We still ended the year with a surplus. But going forward in 25, which is that last column up there, you can see where transfers out are 9.9 million of operating revenues. Now I've got a question mark in there because I don't know where we're going to end up at the end of this year, but if I were gambling on it, my money, I'd put down that we're going to have a deficit, which means that total fund balance is going to drop again. Okay. And that's where all this comes down to. So when we look at our unassigned fund balance percentage here, our fund balance here, there could be 5 categories under GASB, but we just use 2 of them primarily. And so we have assigned and unassigned. Okay. So we have a total fund balance at the end of 24, roughly 30%, and unassigned of 23%. Now, why is that difference there? Well, go back up here. We can see where this deficit affected the total fund balance available. So it dropped it to 58 million. That's 30%. We go down here, we budgeted a deficit in the next fiscal year of 14.3 million. Well, that 14.3 million has to be deducted from the 58 million because that's assigned. That's been assigned for specific purposes by by mayor and commission in this case. And so this total 30% here ends up being the 14 million is the 7%, and the remaining 44 million is the 23%. Now, why is this important? Because if we run a deficit in fiscal year 25, that's going to reduce that total fund balance again. And then if we budget for a deficit or a use of prior year fund balance 26, we stand a good chance of our unassigned fund balance dropping below our policy limit. Now, that's not the end of the world. You know, we're not going to shut down, but then that means that according to the policy, we have to start getting very restrictive, go into austerity measures and that kind of stuff. And I mean, y'all can do that, but yeah, I would just say we could avoid it by the 26 budget process. We avoid budgeting a use of fund balance or a deficit for fiscal year 26. Any questions on this part of it? It's all good news.
Is this back on page 11 where you're saying we were using more of this transfer out of like for general capital fund project? I mean, one could then put forth that maybe that's another good reason for pre-assigning T-Splosh money to needed capital fund projects. Okay.
That's an important observation.
I know, absolutely.
One to kind of lay
Make sure
out in
it's
the
correct.
atmosphere at this point in our budget development process, because if we.
And our fund and our T-Splosh
Well ahead,
process.
that's right. Then we can recognize that, hey, this is a way to keep this trend line from dipping below the black line that you see, you know, where we would jeopardize our fiscal.
I've got an observation.
Melissa and Jesse.
So fleet replacement is a need that's kind of been ignored and has gone up. And we just had our emergency management plan presented, and I bring this up over and over again. Maybe it's time to start talking to UGA and asking for a public safety fee, which is what is very common in college communities throughout the nation. You know, and bringing in additional revenues. I have I'll email some questions about stormwater revenues and what we're seeing from UGA and other non-tax entities. And are they comparable to what tax entities?
Jesse.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to offer for consideration that, you know, that line of where we want to be for a healthy fiscal policy. You know, my understanding, having been pretty involved in the way the CDOs come out for our budget each year, is you know, that's where we need to be healthy. Everything above that is surplus. So I think using the surplus is a responsible use of public funds. And, you know, we can use those in a couple different ways. You can use them to pay for things, especially if you're paying for one-time things. It doesn't really have a negative impact. If you pay for operational things, then you're obligating yourself in the future. Or you can use that to cut taxes. And we've seen it used both ways. But I think using the surplus to fund a bunch of capital projects that we're well behind on, I would argue isn't irresponsible budgeting. It's using the money we have sitting around that goes beyond what we need for the public benefit and doesn't set us up for a negative situation in the future. The other thing I just want to note, and you know, it seems like plenty of people, not just you, are predicting the winds are changing, right? We've heard that a few years in a row and they haven't yet shifted as much as we thought they would. So we kept finding ourselves with more and more surplus. So we'd have this kind of conversation earlier in the year, and then come budget, you know, what was predicted versus what was actual was very different, way more actual, which is I think why you've seen not only those green bars existing in the first place, but then us eating into them. And so, you know, I just say all that to say, maybe what everyone's predicting right now does pan out to be true, and then we can't in the future do what we've done the past couple of years. But if this coming year looks like it has the past couple of years, that bar is going to be a lot higher come budget season. And maybe it won't, probably it won't this time, but you know, just to kind of give some perspective maybe.
To address that, I mean, you're talking about the economy as a whole. We're talking about just Athens-Clarke County. So in Athens-Clarke County, if we run a deficit in 25, like I said, that total fund balance, which is the red and green combined, is going to fall. And then if we budget a deficit in fiscal year 26 or a use of prior year fund balance, then that green line's going to fall. So this is all predicated on what happens here at the local level. Now, I mean, we could have a huge recession and sales tax fall and House Bill 581 could have a much bigger impact on our expected property tax revenues than we think.
But like if we look at FY 22 and FY 23, right? The deficit that was run still landed us above where we were at with a pretty healthy surplus the year prior. And it really only the deficit only landed us at less funds overall, which is still above where we need to be in FY 24. And I think part of that is because there was this significant millage reduction that happened at the same time as a significant increase in the homestead exemption. So, I mean, that's really, if I read what happened here, that's what happened, is we took in less revenue because we cut taxes in multiple ways in FY 24.
Well, our revenues actually went up. You know, they ended the year almost $12 million over budget. So yes, we were impacted by the increase in homestead exemption, but regardless of whether it's an economic condition or a state imposed condition, it still affects us. But the overall trend for fiscal year 24, our revenues are still up significantly, but our operating expenditures were up significantly too. And they grew faster than our operating revenue. And so then when we combine our operating expenditures rising rapidly with our transfers out to other funds rising rapidly, it doesn't matter where they're going. It's just the total dollar amount at the bottom that leads to a deficit during the current fiscal year, which again, I'll say it reduces that total fund balance. And then when we budget a deficit the following fiscal year, it's going to reduce that green margin and it could come below the 16.7. That's all I'm really trying to say is if that trend continues, that's a possibility.
And Commissioner Gould, what you see further on in the presentation are some very specific considerations for Athens-Clarke County, for us. Homestead is one of those things, but there are other considerations that they will talk through.
And speaking of, since you're going with property taxes, again, I don't know. Everybody, it's taxing up $2,500 this year. So that tells me we're gonna be generating more revenue. I mean, that's a huge jump from last year to this year, go $2,500. So telling me we're gonna be generating, if that trend holds across our county, like it is in my neighborhood, and our revenue is gonna increase. Like a lot.
Next year, when there's a limit, that's gonna be where we're gonna.
So what now?
Next year, when that homestead.
And I think you're gonna get into 581.
Right, you're gonna get into that.
Yeah, and two things to remember about your property tax bill, because I got the bill too.
Yeah.
The largest portion of my tax bill is school. Okay. And also in previous year, we got those credits through the state. So it was a big jump because market valuation went up and we didn't get those credits from the state again. So.
I'm glad you brought that because I saw, are you talking about the HTRG county credits?
Yes.
What's that acronym for? Does anyone know? Because I came in here with the paperwork going and you brought it up during your presentation. So fair game now.
Homeowners tax relief grant.
So that was money programmed into the state budget.
Right. So you got a credit on your.
Yeah, and school, we had both of those in each category. And then the sales tax credit, not tonight, but if somebody would send an email so that we can, when people talk about our property taxes, when you look down here and see a credit, it'd be good for us to be able to explain that while we're also explaining that the assessments went up, not the millage rate and all that. But if somebody who could send us an email about that.
Looking for
Free
information
credit.
about the value that's assigned from
lost local option
Thank you.
sales in Texas. Properties.
Okay, so when we talk about inflation impact, this is something we wouldn't have even discussed a few years ago. But, I just happened to look and, and if we just look at nominal, not inflation adjusted, the gap between what we brought in 24 versus 20 is $47 million. That seems like a lot. That seems like a huge revenue growth. When you adjust fiscal year 20 for inflation, that falls below 19 million. So, the same could be said about expenditures too, but up until 24, our expenditures were growing less rapidly. So the inflation effect wasn't quite the same. But, this whole thing here is, this whole part of the presentation really has to do with the key takeaways. We need to take, in my opinion, we need to take a proactive approach on on the effects of inflation on our bottom line. So the first one there is indexing many of our charges and fees. So if you look at that page B7, you'll see where we had charges for services for 25 budgeted at 15.9, and then we had licenses and permits at 928. So you're looking almost $17 million that we had budgeted in those various fees, charges, licensings, and so forth. But there's never been a general increase in all of those fees. So if you go to the budget document pages F19 through 45, those are all the fees you adopted in the budget. But F19 through F37 pertain just to the general fund. And so a lot of times what happens is these fees don't change for years. And then all of a sudden at once, we find a need to raise a fee tremendously. When if we had just been perhaps taking into consideration the annual inflation rate and raising everything annually at 2 to 3% or whatever the inflation rate is, it takes the bite off of it, but it keeps us whole. Second thing is consideration, all the money that we spend outside the general fund, and I just put these two programs in here simply because they were in the fiscal year 25 budget. But if we index those contributions to the programs by inflation, that would set a policy level of how much their rates are going to go up. And I mention that because when I first came here, all of these were independent agencies. We didn't break them down. That was a creation of Chris back here. And so for years, we didn't raise any of these. They all stayed flat, year after year. Through the budget process, we'd sit through presentations and then they walked away with the same amount of money. But, I would suggest that we index those type expenditures to inflation too, unless there's some other reason to raise them more. But at least they don't get behind on what we're contributing, but we stay within the bounds of, our operations too. And then again, like was mentioned just a minute ago, paying capital costs through sales tax programs. If we talk about fleet replacement just in and of itself, I know when I think it was T-Splosh 23 came out, we only got about a third of the public safety fleet replacement that we asked for. And so that's why we had to transfer money to fleet replacement for those 2 years. So I recommend that we really put more emphasis on paying those costs, and that will help the general fund long term. Any questions on this section? Okay. General fund future trends, basically. This is in some respects knowable, and in most respects, it's a guesstimate. Okay, because we're having to guess what various things are going to occur and what various impacts are going to be. We do have some expenditure increases that we have reasonable estimates. We know that the ARPA budget balancing through revenue replacement is ending. Now that doesn't seem like an expenditure increase. But if you're transferring an expenditure to another fund and then you stop doing that because it doesn't exist anymore, then that's an expenditure increase. You just need to be aware of it. Moving payroll cost for 4 ARPA funded general fund over a 4-year period. That's on page B17 of the budget document. We know what those costs are going to be. It's reasonable. The annual required contribution for the pension, we know that reasonably based on what the actuary gives us, and the active and retiree healthcare employee costs. They're based on estimates from the HR consultant. Everything else is estimated in here because we don't really know. One of the interesting things down at the bottom, I guess I really hadn't thought about this, but we got 3 comp studies going at one time. Kind of caught me there.
Let me add one more thing there.
Okay.
Because we just approved the library moving forward. It's supposed to open in 2 years. I just was like, there has to be people in there. Who's gonna pay? Did we get any more state funds or is that all local? Those are new positions. So I'm sure it's gonna be more than 2 people. I mean, I think that we need that if we build that thing and we can't open it. And I'd like to know, does the state have any obligation or is that all on us?
So anticipate there probably would be some state funds, but there's going to be significant local contribution too. And at least in terms of order of magnitude, we could probably go back and look at the initial submission in the SPLOST application because operating expenses have to be part of that submission.
Correct. So we should start planning for that.
Okay, so first we looked at revenue declines or impacts. Okay, so in some cases we call it a decline because we know that interest revenue is going to go down. The Fed starts reducing their short-term Fed funds rate, we're going to make less. The homestead floating exemption that's on the ballot, that's one of the most impossible things to calculate I've ever seen because when we went from 10,000 to 25,000, that $15,000 increase, well, you knew what your current homesteaded property digest was, and you knew if you just increased that 15,000, what the effect would be. But going forward, you don't know what the market value is going to be, the market increase of homesteaded property. Second of all, we don't know yet what the revenue commissioner is going to choose as an inflation rate. I think they offered the option of using the Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI. He could use something else that's much lower because there's other indexes out there. We don't know that. And then on top of that, whatever you have the effect in the first year gets compounded every year thereafter that people stay in their homes. So, if the market inflation rate on a person's home is 6%, but it only goes up 2.5 because that was the inflation rate, then the next year, if the market inflation goes up another 5%, but the inflation rate's only 2.5, it's the 2.5 of that new base that was set the previous year. So it could be compounded. We don't know. Those are just guesstimates.
David, at least one thing that benefits us as a community is we've got a diverse tax digest relative to say a Milton or a Johns Creek, where you've got so much single-family homesteaded property. In fact, we've got commercial properties, multifamily properties, rental properties, industrial properties and the like, means that we won't be hit like some of those other places.
Are we still about 40% homestead?
Of single family, correct?
Of our digest.
Of our digest overall.
Yes.
Here we got the effects of the franchise tax, to clean energy fund. Like I said, just a few years ago, it was 0. This year, we're contributing 1.3 million. That's 700. And then next year, we have to guess what it will be. We figure it'll be a $716,000 increase over what we gave, and we're giving in 24, and then 540,000 roughly for each, and that's just the increase year over year. So that's a revenue impact right there. That's money we will not have in the general fund. And then we look at all of the expenditures here. The 25 is what was in the budget document. And then we kind of have to guess at what some of these are going to be going forward. They may not be what you would choose at all, but since I was the one doing the presentation, I had to take a guess. You know, the sheriff's office compensation, we actually gave 545. I should have put 545 there, but 45,000 to 75,000, something like that was comp study. And then whatever was left over was to cover expenses. Well, when they come back and tell you what the actual comp costs are, if you adopt them, I just guessed at $1 million the first year and 500 the next, and the same for general employee comp. And the same for the fire department class and compensation study. $75,000 and 25 is just for the study. And then I saw in the fiscal year 25 where we gave an extra $500,000 to the alternative response program out of the general fund. I just chose $100,000 going out because I have no idea. That's the decision that will be made at that time. We do know the impact to revenue declines and expenditure increases and so forth is $8 million just from these line items. And then we estimate that it will rise to around $10 million in fiscal year 27. And that's just the increase. That's not the total cost. So, and that concludes on a high note, the presentation.
All right, all
Go
right.
home and have a drink.
It's time.
Well, thank you, David. So Mayor, if I could, I asked David to come and do this presentation, not to say, you know, the sky is falling, really as a foundation for our retreat next week. So, because we're going to talk a little bit more about this, we're going to build upon this. It's not doom and gloom. We're fine right now. But what I do want to convey to everyone is that the upcoming budget, just like all other budget, is based off of priority, big rocks, as we call them here. The more we can focus on the rocks that we want to move forward, the more control we will have over this. So we'll talk more about that.
All right.
All right.
Anything else?
Big motion to adjourn.
I've got a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Wright, second from Commissioner Fisher. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, everybody.
Somebody's got to do it. Great job. That's you didn't get shot.
Wish I got that, King Shower.